There are many words that can describe Studio Trigger: exciting, grandiose, emotional, insane, and wacky. All of these things can be attributed to Studio Trigger's works over the years since the company was formed. With its penchant for off-the-wall storytelling, Studio Trigger has amassed such an incredible following for more than a decade, but why is that? Why was this fairly new company managing to achieve success only being around for 13 years? What was their strategy? What was their plan? What were they cooking? Hey, it's Leon Brando, and in this video we're going to explore the wild and joyous world of Japanese animation studio, Studio Trigger. We're going to go over the company's inception and the beautiful minds that helped create this studio and the works that shaped their legacy for years to come. So without further ado, here is the Anime Studio Deep Dive, Studio Trigger. With anything, there exists a beginning. For Studio Trigger's beginning, it starts with two rather important men. These men being Hiroyuki Amaishi and Masahiko Otsuka. Now who are these guys, you're asking? Well, I'll tell you. Hiroyuki Amaishi was born and raised in Tokyo to a middle-class family. When he turned 10 years old, he went and saw the theatrical version of Mobile Suit Gundam, sparking his love for the series and the model kits. When he attended middle school, he joined a cinema club, but at that stage he'd draw his own manga. Upon finishing high school, he had a dream of one day being an animator, and that was exactly what he wanted to do when he enrolled in university. Only thing is that his vision did not coincide with the vision of what animation and storytelling should be within said university. Hiroyuki Amaishi was also a fan of Studio Gainax and saw an advertisement for a hit 90s anime television show, Neon Genesis Evangelion. This would end up being the first ever anime he got to work on. There would be another prominent figure working at Gainax on the same show though. That man being Masahiko Otsuka. Masahiko Otsuka initially started out as an assistant director in filmmaking, with the first ever studio he joined was Studio Ghibli, makers of classics such as Spirited Away, Kiki's Delivery Service, and most recently, The Boy and the Heron. Otsuka worked on Neon Genesis Evangelion as an assistant director. This wouldn't be the only series Otsuka would be an assistant director on. Other series includes Gurren Lagann and Panty and Stocking, big standout series for the studio. Studio Gainax was going through a definite shift in tone for the series they would create after the success of Evangelion. A lot of the staff entering into these projects were on the younger side, so working alongside minds as hungry and imaginative was able to help curate a lot of the wackier series you'd see being produced. Imaishi was able to better his craft under the tutelage of Kazuya Tsurumaki. Kazuya Tsurumaki was the director of Fooly Cooly. Seeing the tone and style of Fooly Cooly, it didn't serve as a shock that the imaginative nature of that show would follow through into Gurren Lagann. Speaking of Gurren Lagann, this would serve as the first series that would appoint Hiroyuki Amaishi as the series director. Armed with the younger staff we touched on a bit earlier, he wanted to utilize them to the best of their ability. It was with this creative fire that would play into the show and ultimately what structured Studio Trigger into the studio that we know of today. After they finished production on these series, Otsuka and Amaishi would come together and think about the future of both of their careers, whether or not to move to a different studio or to go independent. They chose the latter over the former, and Studio Trigger was founded on August 22, 2011. Masahiko Otsuka stated that, "We were afraid to become too dependent on the particular studio. In order to secure a permanent and stable environment that allows our freedom was to go independent and take responsibility for ourselves." Otsuka and Amaishi wanted to brand Studio Trigger as a place that took creative risks, a place where the unconventional became conventional for them. And with their independence, they would create a short film called Little Witch Academia as a part of 2013's Anime Mirai Project, which is an annual project made by the Japanese Animation Creators Association funded by the Japanese government's Agency of Cultural Affairs as a means of supporting up-and-coming animators. In 2013, Studio Trigger would have a Kickstarter for Little Witch Academia 2, which was the working title at the time. Studio Trigger would say in their Kickstarter messages that, "Being a new studio, we felt the Kickstarter system to be innovative and fitting to our studio's taste. Making a series with the fans is definitely what we were looking for. With the support from our fans, we believe that we could definitely develop on this new foundation." Studio Trigger would then amass their stretch goal starting at $150,000 in a little under 6 hours. To say this was a massive feat would be an understatement for the at the time brand new animation studio. When the Kickstarter was finally closed, the campaign had been pledged a staggering $625,518. The vision of where Studio Trigger would take themselves would soon be realized. Studio Trigger has a very particular animation philosophy. I talked earlier about their penchant for creative risks, but Studio Trigger was very set on freedom of creativity. They would even extend their hand to fans to see if they could come up with ideas that they might be interested in portraying. Otsuka wanted Trigger to be a studio that can't be predicted. Studio Trigger has a very distinct art style. While other animated shows have a cleaner and more modern feel to them, Studio Trigger's animation style is very reminiscent of anime from the late 90s to early 2000s. It has a very vintage feel, and this was by design. Kill la Kill is a perfect example of this due to it reflecting the exact design philosophy that Imaishi and Otsuka were looking for. Hiromi Wakabayashi, another animated creative officer on Kill la Kill, had this to say on the style of the show. He says Kill la Kill's presentation is very old school anime, it's what our generation grew up with, it feels nostalgic to us. With Kill la Kill being an original work for the studio, they were allowed to fully exercise the creative freedom with regard to the production. Characters' facial expressions, the way in which the action scenes flow, it has all the mark of what Trigger's animation will look like going forward. Studio Trigger is comprised of fans first. Every piece of media that the animators, directors, writers, anyone involved in the production have watched, they make sure their inspirations are heavily imbued within the shows they develop, but also giving it that Studio Trigger touch-up that all of these shows have. For Trigger, their personal enjoyment is a must-have. The team is not satisfied with just simply adapting a work or just making one just to make it. Emaishi stated that he gets bored very easily. He wants to do something new for every series the team works on in an event to avoid boredom. Every Trigger product has striking visuals and a roughly drawn art style to make it stand out from what you normally see. Each series they work on has vastly different subject matter and tone than the rest. The series will feel like a Trigger work, but characterization and the story will differ from the ones prior. Trigger has a set tone of shows feeling very lighthearted and nonsensical. The comedic timing, the background, everything is being done in this specific way to make sure the audience is engaged with what they're viewing. These design choices are had so that Trigger makes works that will be remembered in a decade's time. For as creative as they want to be, the team at Trigger wants to give audiences a worthwhile experience that sticks with them for years to come. The soundtracks are also very much at play with this tactic. For Kill la Kill, they enlisted the help of famed composer Hiroyuki Sawano. Now, Hiroyuki Sawano is widely known for his work on the soundtrack for hit anime TV show Attack on Titan. Sawano's music is able to make every scene seem that much more important. In regard to Kill la Kill, the soundtrack was memorable due to the fact that it got across how grand and larger than life the show was trying to portray to the viewers. It is a soundtrack that is still regarded as one of the best anime soundtracks 11 years later. Kill la Kill being Trigger's first official animated show, the team would take the anime world by storm. It was a shakeup in the year 2013, a show with this style, fast-paced action, a premise that takes up at breakneck speed, and stellar soundtrack. The Studio Trigger would put their foot down on their introduction in the anime world as a fledgling company that made you pay attention to what they were making. It quickly rose to being one of the most successful and popular animes of that year. This style is, however, not only akin to Kill la Kill. In their first ever feature film, Promare was released in 2019 and had a premise of a group of firefighters in mechs to protect the world from a group called the Mad Burnish. Promare would go on to amass $9.6 million worldwide and will return in theaters for one day only on December 8, 2019 under the name Promare Redux. Keeping up with the differing styles of animation, Promare utilizes more CG in the film than prior works. It worked to seamlessly blend the 2D animation with the 3D CG. This is a design choice by Emaishi. Emaishi was asked about the dynamic camera angles and choreography of Promare and was asked if he did anything different from the usual. Emaishi stated he wanted to have longer shots of action scenes in the movie, making sure to not break away at any given moment for it. He expressed how it can get exhausting seeing long action scenes in animation, but he wanted to give it his all with the action scenes. Studio Trigger, while having a set identity on their storytelling and animation, they are a company that is still able to reinvent themselves in a way that feels fresh while also still being new to the creators behind the individual projects. To say Studio Trigger has influence outside of Japan would be putting it very mildly, but in particular they have a very strong presence on the Western audience. I talked about Trigger's animation style and how the style they were going for was this retro nostalgic feel to their shows. It would be this stylistic choice that would cement their footing in the Western world. Studio Trigger animes would feel like a Saturday morning cartoon. It looking the way that it does takes you back in time and makes the audience feel very nostalgic. Nostalgia is a very powerful tactic in the business world and an even stronger emotion for people to feel, but with Trigger they wanted to share this emotion with the viewers because it's something that's very important to them as well. Studio Trigger as a company wants to feel very connected with its fan base, so they can share the same experiences they had working on it in contrast to the viewer just watching the product. They are fans like you're a fan, and with their shows they reiterate this sentiment to you repeatedly. Due to shows being very abundant in passion and very full of life, it resonates with fans in the West. Everything was inventive. It would make people feel like a kid again doodling in their notebooks. It also helped that Trigger were fans of Western animation and set influences are put into their shows as well. Characters from cartoon shows would appear as background characters in their anime. Shows like Inferno Cop, Space Patrol Luluco, BNA, and SSSS Gridman would all share these same influences, even with one of their most recent showings where they would collaborate with Disney to produce an episode for Star Wars Visions. Studio Trigger would also do work for other Western TV shows. They animated the Season 2 intro of Adult Swim series Black Dynamite, did the opening animation for Cartoon Network series OKKO Let's Be Heroes. Takafumi Hori, who was an animator for Trigger, assisted Cartoon Network for an episode of Steven Universe, and their smash hit anime adaptation of CD Projekt Red's Cyberpunk 2077 into Cyberpunk Edgerunners, which also received overwhelming critical acclaim and won the Anime of the Year award at the 2023 Crunchyroll Awards. A statement made by Trigger says, "What we want to do is support and communicate with the fans who enjoy our titles and cheer us on no matter where they are from, Japan or otherwise. It's with this that the studio wanted their brand to be ever expansive, to be able to breach barriers and to make sure their product isn't just exclusive to a Japanese audience, but to an audience worldwide. One where everyone can enjoy the content and is accessible to all." I brought up before that Studio Trigger has a knack for their sense of scale. They have numerous set pieces that portray how grand their worlds are, and their sense of scale can be very cinematic, which helps give it a unique feel when viewing other works. To be passion driven first and foremost, and to continue this business model for well over a decade spoke to Trigger's inherent philosophy behind the company. Studio Trigger has been a fan favorite anime studio since its creation. It's been able to keep viewer attention due to the amount of products they've released over the years that were interesting in more ways than one. A company that believes in creative liberties, to just do whatever they feel like in the moment because it's fun to them and to share that fun with the viewers. To have a company that wants to feel so ingrained with its core base, to want to make fans feel like they're a part of the journey with the production of the series is something not many studios do or even consider. Trigger made their mark with anime fans by being the wild child, by going, hey, we're going to be the weird ones, to be the risk takers, to challenge norms, to burn as brightest as they can. In 2024, Trigger has been producing the anime adaptation of hit manga Delicious in Dungeon, which is currently airing on Netflix. It's a story with the wild nature that Studio Trigger longs for, so a series like that was right up their alley. But there is a wilder anime out there that it would soon return to. At Anime Expo in 2022, Studio Trigger was shocked the anime world. A continuation of 2010 anime series Panty and Stocking, originally under the rights of Studio Gainax, was confirmed to return under Studio Trigger. The series was originally set to have a season 2, but it never came to fruition. Numerous people speculated as to what the fate of the series was, but more and more people eventually gave up on wishing for a continuation. Until Studio Trigger pulled through and announced that they would be producing the next season. And the following year in 2023 at Anime Expo, they confirmed that they acquired the rights to Panty and Stocking from Studio Gainax, fully owning the IP and not just licensing it. The team behind Panty and Stocking were always very adamant on making more of the series, but higher-ups were moving on to other projects. Hope was kept alive, and in a miraculous situation, one thought impossible named Maishi himself, they were able to secure the rights. The staff even made a joke about them having so many ideas that they could make 10 seasons in a movie called The Battle of Hoover Dam, which for how long the show has been held under a different studio for a decade plus, I wouldn't doubt them on this. Studio Trigger has seen the success that they have because they're a studio that has stayed true to themselves even after all the time has passed. They are still hungry for showcasing new content like they were when they first started, the staff all having a blast where they are. They don't have to feel like they're chasing trends, just producing content that they see fit. You can always tell a Trigger anime from other series going on. It's always a positive when people can pick up in no amount of time that something is made by a particular studio or director. There are many things left for Trigger to accomplish, other more insane stories to tell, more adventures for people to go on. Of course, they don't stop at just creating anime. Studio Trigger is also on YouTube where they showcase a lot of their illustrations and do live drawings of their iconic characters. They also have audio commentaries of shows they've worked on as well. They recently did a commentary watch along of Cyberpunk Edgerunners. Studio Trigger also has a Twitch channel where you can see the masterful artists do live drawings on there as well. They also have streams where they build keyboards as well. Always good to have range in what you do. This helps them stay more in touch with the fans and keep up with the times as they've shown before. They have a knack for doing that. Studio Trigger is here to stay, and they have a lot more to give to the wild world of anime, so to Studio Trigger, keep on creating and inspiring and giving people the worlds they've come to love. It is always appreciated. And always, just being hype as hell. Thank you all for watching the video. This is something I've wanted to make for a while, and I want to talk more about anime studios in the future, so for you guys, tell me your favorite Studio Trigger animes in the comments. Trigger definitely had an impact on yours truly, and I wanted this to showcase how far they've come as a whole. But that's enough out of me. I've been Leon Brando, and I'll be seeing you all next time. Studio Madhouse has been an animation mainstay for over 50 years, creating timeless classics that the world over has known. Stories ranging from magical girls to amoral pirates to a teenage boy wielding a notebook that can kill anyone he wants to. Studio Madhouse has been entertaining the masses for several decades, but how did this studio come to be? Where does it begin, and why have they stuck around for so many years? It's Leon Brando, and today we're going to be looking at none other than Japanese animation studio Studio Madhouse. There's a lot of history to cover with Madhouse, seeing as they've been around for quite some time now. So I'm going to tackle as much as I possibly can. So with intros out of the way, this is the Anime Studio Deep Dive, Studio Madhouse. Studio Madhouse's story would not start when the company was officially formed. We have to go back much farther than that. But we're going to focus on one particular man, the man known as Osamu Tezuka. For anyone who doesn't know who Osamu Tezuka is, I'll explain. Osamu Tezuka is known to many as the god of manga. He's the creator of the legendary series Astro Boy, among many others. In 1960, Osamu Tezuka would work on a series called Sayuki, or in the West known as Alakazam the Great. The studio that produced this was called Toei Doga, but they're known now to the world as Toei Animation. Tezuka's involvement with this project would be limited, but he was listed in the credits of the series. Creative differences would emerge between Toei Animation and Tezuka, and he would soon exit the company. In 1961, a year prior to his leave from Toei, Tezuka would create his own production company known as Mushi Productions, which was to serve as an alternative to Toei. Mushi Productions would adapt many of his own works into anime form. His biggest, of course, would be the anime adaptation of Astro Boy. In 1968, Osamu Tezuka would step down from Mushi Productions and hand over the reins to Hideaki and Yoko Hata, a husband and wife duo, and Osamu Dezaki, who is very important to the story. Unfortunately, in 1973, Mushi Productions would file for bankruptcy, but the following year was when another studio would be born. Following the bankruptcy of Mushi Productions, Studio Madhouse would be founded on October 17, 1972 by Osamu Dezaki, Masao Maruyama, Rintaro, and Yoshiaki Kawajiri, all ex-Mushi Productions staff. Studio Madhouse began as an outsourcing unit for TMS Entertainment, short for Tokyo Movie Shinsa. Osamu Dezaki was a manga artist as early as when he was in high school. In 1963, he joined Mushi Productions, along with Masao Maruyama, where we would meet Osamu Dezaki during their time at Mushi Pro. Studio Madhouse would receive funding from Yutaka Fujioka, the founder of Tokyo Movie Shinsa, who would also co-produce the animes that would be taken under Tokyo Movie Shinsa. Masao Maruyama, who was a key figure in the studio, would have his sole focus on producing and planning Madhouse's upcoming projects and would serve as the studio's president during the 1970s to the 1980s. He was the piece that held everything else together for Studio Madhouse. Masao Maruyama, of course, would end up being the founder of Studio Mappa late in 2011. Shigeyuki Hayashi, otherwise known as Rintaro, began working in the animation industry as early as 17 years old. He would serve as the in-between animator for the 1958 film Hakujaden, another animated work produced by Toei Doga. Finally, we have Yoshiaki Kawajiri, who was another employee of Mushi Productions who worked as an animator for the company. After co-founding Madhouse, he would be promoted to animation director, and in 1984, he would debut his first ever feature film produced by Madhouse called Galactic Patrol Lensman. With these four visionaries in tow, after leaving Mushi Pro, Studio Madhouse would produce several works throughout the 1970s to the 80s, their first work being an anime called Aim for the Ace, which would be released on October 5th, 1973. Remember when I said that Madhouse started as an outsourcing unit for TMS Entertainment? Well, this was one of the shows they helped co-animate. Aim for the Ace is an adaptation of the extremely successful shoujo manga of the same name. It's a story about 15-year-old Hiromi Oka, who was inspired by professional tennis player Reika Ryuzaki to compete in tennis herself. Aim for the Ace would run from October 5th, 1973 to March 29, 1974. Osamu Dezaki would serve as a series director for all 26 of the episodes surrounding Aim for the Ace. On April 7, 1975, Osamu Dezaki would also direct an anime by the name of Gamba no Boken, or Adventures of Gamba. This was yet another animated work that Madhouse would co-animate with Tokyo Movie Shinsa. Adventures of Gamba stars a little mouse by the name of Gamba who wants to venture out into the ocean with his friends, but he comes across a mouse who's a victim of the tyrannical reign of a white ferret by the name of Noroi. Adventures of Gamba would run on for 5 months, from April 7, 1975 to September 29, 1975. Adventures of Gamba would get a film release on March 4, 1984. Gamba would be fairly popular throughout its tenure, but Madhouse would also work on other series during these times. Jetter Mars is another anime with a collaborative effort, this time not with Tokyo Movie Shinsa but with Toei Animation. Jetter Mars would debut on February 3, 1977, written by Osamu Tezuka and directed by Rintaro this time around. Jetter Mars was an interesting development to say the least. Osamu Tezuka originally wanted to create a remake of his hit manga Astro Boy, but after complications with finances with Mushi Productions, he wasn't able to secure the rights to Astro Boy and would end up reworking it into Jetter Mars. Jetter Mars tells the story of two doctors that create a robot boy of the same name who is very powerful and many times has to choose whether to use his powers for the good of the people or for his own gain. Jetter Mars would air from February 3, 1977 to September 15, 1977. Other shows would include Nobody's Boy Remy, directed once again by Dezaki, and another collab between Madhouse and Tokyo Movie Shinsa. That would debut on October 2nd, 1977 and would run from then to October 1st, 1978, just 1 day short of a year. Nobody's Boy Remy, which would be an adaptation of a book by French novelist Hector Malou called Sans Famille. Nobody's Boy Remy's story was about an orphan by the name of Remy who works for a traveling group that wants to scrounge up enough money to meet his foster family. Nobody's Boy Remy would eventually get a film on March 15, 1980, once again directed by Osamu Dezaki. Same with Treasure Island, which premiered on October 8, 1978, just a week removed from the last episode of Nobody's Boy Remy. This anime was an adaptation based off of the 1883 book of the same name written by author Louis Stevenson. This story was about a boy named Jim Hawkins who set himself out on a journey to obtain treasure left behind by once famed pirate Captain Flint, and eventually come to blows with another pirate by the name of John Silver. Treasure Island would air from October 8th, 1978 to April 1st, 1979. It would receive a film on May 9th, 1987 and eventually an OVA on December 21st, 1992. Madhouse would go on to work on other productions in the 1980s, one being Galactic Patrol Lensman coming out on October 6, 1984 to March 30th, 1985, which would be a collaborative effort this time with Tatsunoko Productions, and the second anime being Yawara, an adaptation of the manga of the same name written by the legendary mangaka Naoki Urasawa. More on his contributions to Madhouse later. But, as I said about Galactic Patrol Lensman, it was a collaboration with Tatsunoko. Yes, the same Tatsunoko that gave us Tatsunoko vs. Capcom much later on in their career in 2008. Back to the anime though. So Galactic Patrol Lensman was based on the Lensman series by the very celebrated American author Edward Elmer Smith. Galactic Patrol Lensman tells the story of a young man named Kimball Kinnison as he's about to leave his home, but a Galactic Patrol ship crashes down on his home, and the pilot of said ship before his passing gives Kimball a lens. The lens attaches itself to his hand, and Kimball sets his sights on the wider reaches of the universe. This would also receive a feature film called Lensman Secret of the Lens, which would release on July 7, 1984. Rounding out the 80s productions, Madhouse would make a series I mentioned earlier called Yawara. Yawara would air from October 16, 1989 to September 21, 1992. Yawara is about a girl named Yawara who for her entire life up until that point was being trained by her grandfather who had plans for her to one day win the gold medal at the Olympics for judo. Only thing with that though is that Yawara just wants to be a regular girl and lead a normal life. Yawara, like the other series mentioned, would also get a film on August 1, 1992. So that was most of the productions Madhouse has done from the 70s to the 80s. These works were adapted from other forms of media, primarily literature. There was a lot of range for these titles, and this was Madhouse's humble beginnings. But this isn't the studio Madhouse we're all familiar with, right? Madhouse would really start to get into their element in the 1990s. See, Madhouse has been on a monumental tear in the anime space spanning 3 whole decades, the 1990s, the 2000s, and of course the 2010s. Madhouse, as we've seen before, was trying their hand with many things in the decades prior, but it would be in the 90s when Madhouse became a mainstay into the anime world forever. The 90s were a special time for entertainment, and with Studio Madhouse this would be no different. Several iconic works would be produced from the studio during this time, and it would start out with an anime called Record of Lodoss War. Now, Record of Lodoss War was an adaptation of a light novel of the same name. One of the more recognized animes from the 90s, Record of Lodoss War was a high fantasy anime that came out on June 30th, 1990. It was essentially a Dungeons & Dragons anime come to life, and everyone was very receptive to a work of this nature. Everything down to the character designs, the setting, art style. This was an anime that was held very fondly within the community. Studio Madhouse during the time, and especially during the 2000s, would collaborate with some very influential figures within the anime space, or just an entertainment space as a whole, creating works that would be known the world over. One of these collaborations would be with the famous manga group known as Clamp. Now, for anyone who doesn't know what Clamp is an all-female Japanese manga artist group that was formed during the mid-1980s and then began creating their own work in 1987. Studio Madhouse establishing a working relationship with Clamp, they would produce several of their works under the studio, their first work being an adaptation of dark fantasy manga Tokyo Babylon. Clamp has a very particular brand of storytelling, ranging from varying topics such as societal themes, comedies, and tragedies. Clamp utilizing these styles made their work stand out from others and would be incredibly beneficial toward where Madhouse was headed as a studio. Also from Clamp, Madhouse would produce a work known as X, which would begin as a film and then later on as an anime. X, or X the Movie, came out on August 3rd, 1996. It was directed by Rintaro and also co-wrote the movie alongside the head writer of Clamp, Nanase Okawa. X the Anime, which would come out on October 3rd, 2001, directed by Yoshiaki Kawajiri. Remember this name because he's someone that we're going to be talking about more in a bit later on in the video. X was one of those shows that would deal in the heavier subject matter I brought up before that Clamp has a tendency of delving into. X's manga was on hiatus during this time due to real-world matters occurring as the manga was under serialization, so production had to take matters into their own hands with how they would finish the story. X would finish airing on March 27, 2002. As for Clamp's most famous anime during their time at Madhouse, that would go to a show called Cardcaptor Sakura. The shoujo juggernaut would be released on April 7, 1998. This, among many shows, would bring Studio Madhouse's name to the forefront of anime discussions. Cardcaptor Sakura took the world by storm, even airing on Western programming on Kids WB in 2001 under the name Cardcaptors, and eventually airing on Cartoon Network's Toonami block on June 4, 2001. Cardcaptor Sakura garnering that Western popularity would bring it to new heights, alongside another show that will come out during that same year that I will touch on very shortly. Clamp's partnership with Madhouse wouldn't stop there either. They would go on to make Chobits, releasing on April 2, 2002. Chobits, another recognizable anime from the company, would later on be licensed by now defunct English dubbing company Funimation in 2010, from Geneon, another licensing company, back in 2002. Clamp made their mark as mangakas and an even bigger mark with Madhouse adapting all of their works for a wider audience. But to step away from Clamp, I mentioned that there was another anime that Madhouse would be behind, and it's none other than the cult classic anime Trigun. Trigun's uniqueness stemmed from it being a space western, a very different approach for an anime, and also being accompanied by a very talented English dubbed cast with Johnny Young Bosch starring as the main character Vash the Stampede. Trigun is a very beloved series, especially from the Western Front, another series that would air on Cartoon Network's Toonami block on March 31st, 2003. Although Trigun would have a shadow cast over it by the bigger series debuting in the same year, Cowboy Bebop, it was still able to win the hearts of many, for still having an identity of its own and being one of the many standout shows from Madhouse at the time. I made mention before by Yoshiaki Kawajiri, and this man is a very integral part to Studio Madhouse's success. Yoshiaki Kawajiri, of course, directed the animes talked about prior, but we needed to delve into his filmmaking as well. His breakout film would be a movie called Wicked City, which was released in 1987. Kawajiri had a knack for being very interested in creating animation that was a lot harsher and darker in tone. Wicked City initially started out as a 35-minute short film, but after Kawajiri's producers were so taken back by the quality of the work, they asked him to make it into a full feature-length film. With Wicked City being his smash hit, it would open up many doors for Kawajiri as a director. Kawajiri would also be in charge for other films that would come out in the years to come. On June 5th, 1993, he released a film called Ninja Scroll, later releasing it in the States in 1996. This would skyrocket Kawajiri's name into the anime stratosphere. Yoshiaki Kawajiri is now an international star, showing everyone how talented he was as a director, for having a style all to his own and producing films with fantastic animation. Madhouse was continuing to be on the rise, and it would continue with this particular movie. Vampire Hunter D. Not to be confused with the 1985 Vampire Hunter D release, but specifically Vampire Hunter D Bloodlust. Vampire Hunter D Bloodlust is definitely a movie that most anime fans are accustomed to hearing about or know. Yoshiaki Kawajiri would not only be the director of this movie, he also wrote the script and storyboarded the film. Vampire Hunter D Bloodlust would release in Japan on April 21st, 2000 and would then release in the West on September 23rd, 2001. It would be adapted from the third novel of the series written by Hideyuki Kikuchi, and it was a work that Kawajiri himself was very personally invested in portraying to the world. Also being a fan of Western filmmaking, he would take said inspiration and put that into Bloodlust, a passion project for Kawajiri, and it showed within the movie. Circling back to other productions during the 90s, back in 1994, Rintaro would work on an OVA based on Final Fantasy called Final Fantasy Legend of the Crystals, which was based on Final Fantasy V but set 200 years after the events of the game. Madhouse was making all of the correct moves during the 90s, whether it be amassing a team of extremely talented animators, collaborating with a historical group of mangakas, or giving a chance to very passionate storytellers. Studio Madhouse was on a tear in the animation world. Whether their stories were hidden gems to cult classics, Madhouse was creating products that are still held to this day in very high regard. But this would also pave a way for a new era for Madhouse. Slowly exiting the 90s with a very good track record of productions, Madhouse would make classic after classic after classic. This would be the 2000s era of Madhouse. The 2000s would usher in several different waves of entertainment and would serve as a very poignant decade for anime. Even though Madhouse reached very great lengths during the 90s, it would really be the 2000s when they were at the highest point of their popularity. From Hajime no Ippo to Nana to Beck or Mongolian Chop Squad, Madhouse was weaving their way to everyone's hearts with each and every production they worked on. But before I delve into all of these projects, we need to circle back to a very, very important man. A man that couldn't be left out of this video and someone whose impact is felt to this very day in entertainment. That man being Satoshi Kon. Satoshi Kon is a man that realistically doesn't need any introduction. His works are held as masterclasses in his field and even outside of the realm of animation, but into filmmaking as a whole. Satoshi Kon has created 4 films and a TV show, and ultimately a 6th work, but would unfortunately pass away before it came to fruition. All of these works were produced by Studio Madhouse. Masao Maruyama would have Satoshi Kon on board after being impressed on his work as a key animator on episode 2 of the 90s OVA of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Stardust Crusaders. Satoshi Kon's directorial debut would start with the classic film Perfect Blue, which released in 1997, adapted from a novel of the same name. Perfect Blue was a film so influential, shots from the movie would be recreated in other Western media. Initially, Satoshi Kon, per his words, said the first script was not interesting whatsoever, the script being written by the original author of the Perfect Blue novel, and he'd rather make changes to the story. Kon was allowed to do that, but he had to keep 3 elements of the work within the film: the idol, horror, and stalker aspects of the novel. Kon agreed, and the rest is history with the rollout of Perfect Blue. After the success of Perfect Blue, Satoshi Kon would direct another film titled Millennium Actress, which would release in Japan on 2001 and later in the West on September 14, 2003. Millennium Actress would be yet again another critically hailed movie across the board. It would also go on to win several awards and displayed at several film festivals during the time. Satoshi Kon at this point was a very revered man in his field with only 2 works under his belt. The pressure was on Kon and Madhouse to keep producing works of this caliber consistently like this. Fan outcry would be immense for Kon's work. In an interview with Anime News Network back in 2008, Satoshi Kon stated that he'd received a lot of support for his films from fans through various means and it bolstered him immensely, feeling ever grateful for the feedback. Satoshi Kon would add to this with the release of Tokyo Godfathers, his 3rd film, which released on November 8, 2003. Satoshi Kon would take inspiration for Tokyo Godfathers from the 1948 Western film Three Godfathers directed by John Ford. Satoshi Kon's focus for the movie was to deliver on a more grounded and realistic format for it, as opposed to his prior films grappling with the unnatural in the sense of reality being tampered with, and the setting of the film being centered around Christmas time. Tokyo Godfathers will once again be hailed critically and enjoyed by the general public en masse, being praised for the various themes present in the film such as family values, identity, and the meaning of Christmas spirit. Tokyo Godfathers would eventually have a new English dub cast as it has been digitally restored in 4K for a secondary release in the West. Kon's other works would also receive the 4K digital restoration treatment years later. Pivoting away from filmmaking, Satoshi Kon would set his sights on a television series. For the first time in his career, he'd be at the helm of an anime by the name of Paranoia Agent, releasing on February 3, 2004 in Japan and then later on in the West on May 28, 2005 on the Toonami block. Paranoia Agent would be another hit under the belt of Satoshi Kon. The psychological thriller was positively received from critics and fans alike, more so captivated even with the opening of the show. Interestingly enough, Paranoia Agent's opening would be one of the first anime openings ever uploaded on YouTube only being created back in February of that year. Most of Satoshi Kon's works delve into the perception of reality or the characters around them, all widely unique to a series all of their own. Paranoia Agent would also not be spared from his fair share of controversy though. Paranoia Agent would actually be banned in several countries due to the subject matter, a scene depicting child suicide. The show would receive a partial ban in Japan and to be shown on a different network altogether and not on regular Japanese programming. In the United Kingdom, the specific scene in the 8th episode would have to be removed entirely before the show would premiere. In North America, it would receive a censored version of Paranoia Agent, where the uncensored version of this series would be released on Blu-ray in 2021. Satoshi Kon would make his return to filmmaking with the release of a film called Paprika, releasing on November 25, 2006 in Japan and would hit theaters on May 25, 2010 in the West. Paprika would be Satoshi Kon's fourth and final film. It was based on a 1993 novel of the same name by Japanese author Yasutaka Susui. Paprika would be written by Satoshi Kon and co-written by Seishi Minakami, who would also work with Kon on Paranoia Agent. Paprika was another psychological thriller often praised for the visual aspect of the movie alongside the narrative and characters. Satoshi Kon, of course no stranger to messing with your sense of perception, takes it to the umpteenth degree in Paprika. Paprika centers on the subject of dreams and reality, how the two can blend with each other and often can switch places within this world. In the behind the scenes of Paprika, Satoshi Kon would have a particular approach to this movie. He began storyboarding the film without the ending in mind. Although he and his team would discuss the ending prior, he decided to follow through with this method in tow for his visualization process. He didn't want to focus on creating a one-to-one adaptation of the original novel because he sees the source material as better regardless, so he wanted to make sure to really get across the dream sequences in conjunction to having the narrative flow seamlessly throughout. He would eventually finish the script in January 2005. Satoshi Kon was very receptive to the ideas during the production of Paprika. He was never a stickler for doing things as is. He always welcomed change, which in turn would be realized in the final product of his works, a person always having his mind on what's next after something is finished. I said before that Paprika would be Satoshi Kon's final movie, and it unfortunately was. In May of 2010, as Satoshi Kon would be working on his fifth film titled Dreaming Machine, he'd be diagnosed with terminal pancreatic cancer and would be given half a year to live. Satoshi Kon's final message would be uploaded to his blog. A lot was said in his final message, but I will post the link to the entire message in the description. He would state that in his final message that, "It's so disrespectful to die before one's parents, but in the last 10 plus years, I've been able to do what I want as an anime director, achieve my goals, and get some good reviews. I do feel regret that my films didn't make a lot of money, but I think they got what they deserved. In these last 10 plus years in particular, I felt as though I've lived more intensively than other people, and I think that my parents understood what was in my heart. So to everyone who stuck with me through this long document, thank you. With my heart full of gratitude for everything good in the world, I'll put down my pen. Now excuse me, I have to go. Satoshi Kon." Satoshi Kon would pass away on August 24, 2010. He would go down as one of the greatest visionaries within the entertainment space. A person's mind so brilliant it would captivate numerous people. His films live on as a testament to his legacy as a filmmaker. A man so dedicated to his craft that very passion bled through his work. Beyond the awards and accolades, Satoshi Kon understood what it meant to tell a story, to entertain, to make sure something stuck with you no matter what it was. He was, and still is, a legend. Studio Madhouse wanted to complete his final work, Dreaming Machine, but at the time lacked proper funding to produce the film. Kon wanted the film to be a family movie, a movie for a wider audience. In 2011, Masao Maruyama stated that the film would be put on hold for financial reasons, only having 600 out of 1,500 shots animated. He also stated that he's waiting for the right director to oversee the project. There has been no recent word on the development of Dreaming Machine, but it is still very much out there waiting to be developed. With Satoshi Kon leaving his mark in the 2000s, Madhouse would also follow through with their productions as well. Now during this time for Studio Madhouse, they would achieve popularity outside their wildest imaginations, and that would all fall back to the certain shows. On January 6, 2009, we would get the second season of Hajime no Ippo called Hajime no Ippo New Challenger. The popularity of the series was too high to be ignored, and Madhouse went into development for its continuation. New Challenger would follow up right after where season 1 ended. An eventual third season of Hajime no Ippo would be made titled Hajime no Ippo Rising. Of course, we can't forget about the year 2001. 2001 would be the birth of a series of booming popularity and merchandising. That series is called Beyblade. As we know, animes are primarily made for the intention to promote the manga, but Beyblade was running alongside the manga to help promote the extremely successful toy line at the time. Beyblade would be licensed under Canadian animation company Nelvana. They would undertake the English adaptation of the series. Needless to say, many things were altered for the English release of the show. Character names that were once Japanese were changed to more American names, changing up character portrayals to give off a different impression of them for Western audiences. This was a common practice at the time for Western releases of anime. Cardcaptor Sakura was also no different during this time as well. Even with these changes, the anime still grew vastly in popularity. Madhouse would also dabble in video game adaptations with the release of the anime Gungrave based on the video game of the same name. Gungrave would release on October 7, 2003 and would debut in the West on July 6, 2004. It wouldn't stop there either. Madhouse would also provide an anime adaptation for the popular hack and slash series Devil May Cry, which would release on June 14, 2007. Devil May Cry being a big franchise for Capcom, it was riding the high of success off of the series, and an anime would soon follow it. In 2004, Madhouse would produce an adaptation of the combat manga Tenjo Tenge. Now, Tenjo Tenge wasn't as popular as the other series that we mentioned in this video, but it would have a sizable enough following, and also, just showing off how well choreographed this dance sequence is. Madhouse would be no stranger to American media as we've seen before, but this time it was a bit different. This time it dealt with an American film titled The Matrix. The Matrix is held as one of the greatest films ever made and would go on to produce several other films within the franchise, but in 2003, Studio Madhouse would create an anime called The Animatrix. The Animatrix was a film comprised of 9 animated short films that gave audiences a backstory to the Matrix movies while also expanding on the universe of said world. Also in 2004, Madhouse would adapt Naoki Urasawa's classic manga, Monster. This wasn't the first time Madhouse would adapt an Urasawa work, but tackling a work this revered was a task the company felt confident being able to bring to life. Monster was a story about a brain surgeon named Tenma who was tasked with a choice, either save the life of a dying boy or the life of the mayor. The choice he makes drives the entire series into motion. The anime was hailed for being faithful to the source material and would gain a cult following soon after. Following through on cult classics that also came out in 2004, Studio Madhouse would give us the coming-of-age musical drama Beck, Mongolian Chop Squad. Beck would go on from October 7, 2004 to March 31, 2005. When it got its English release, the songs would be re-recorded in English for the Western audiences. It would be distributed in the West by Funimation. I mentioned before that Madhouse tackled the Final Fantasy adaptation, right? Well, in 2005, they would provide another one, this time on the biggest title in their respective franchise, Final Fantasy VII, titled Last Order Final Fantasy VII. Not a widely known production under Madhouse's belt considering it spawned from one of the biggest games of a generation. Last Order Final Fantasy VII was a 25-minute OVA that didn't receive a Western release or a dub. Last Order Final Fantasy VII follows the story of Zack Fair investigating a monster attack near a village called Nibelheim, along with famed war hero Sephiroth. Seeing as other media also portrays this story that would release later on at more length, this anime did fall to the wayside for more people. Moving into 2006 would arguably be Madhouse's biggest year for the studio. July 15, 2006 would be the release date of a film called The Girl Who Leapt Through Time, directed by the legendary director Mamoru Hosoda. The Girl Who Leapt Through Time was based on the 1967 novel of the same name by Yasutaka Susui, who was also the novelist behind Paprika earlier. Although the film was based on the novel, it was actually a spin-off of the book that would take place in the modern day rather than the original setting and focuses on telling an alternate story and having different characters from the book. The Girl Who Leapt Through Time would earn a staggering $873,435 worldwide and would also be home to several awards after its release. 2006 would be the debut of the anime adaptation of the popular shoujo manga Nana, which ran from April 6, 2006 to March 28, 2007. It would go on for 47 episodes. Madhouse would go on to produce essentially their most popular anime to date, Death Note. Death Note was an adaptation of the hit Shonen Jump manga that started back in December 1st, 2003. The anime propelled the series to new heights. Death Note is one of the most lauded anime to ever exist. Madhouse made sure that it would receive every bit of care they could humanly extend to it. Death Note was put on Cartoon Network's Adult Swim, and the rest was history. The popularity for the manga and anime was unquantifiable. The anime ran for 37 episodes and be directed by the famed Tetsuro Araki, who's responsible for all the memorable shots the anime is known for. Tetsuro Araki was a fan of the manga, having owned all the books. He insisted that he be given the job of director behind the anime. He felt that the manga would make for a great anime, so he wanted to stick as close to the manga as he could, while also making sure it fit for an anime. Tetsuro Araki stated that episode 1 was very challenging in particular to adapt because he had this longing fear that it wouldn't measure up to the manga fan expectations, but after the episode aired, he was showered with praise over how good a job he did. Tetsuro Araki had a talent for making mundane actions seem more important than they actually were. His uses of dynamic camera angles always came into play within his series. This is a trait that would be synonymous with him and his work in the future. When asked about how he keeps his individuality while adapting a work, Araki responded by saying, "Rather than sticking to my own things, I try to put as much energy as I can into making every product a success, but I also always try to see whether a product is an occasion to try out things I've never done before." Death Note, having been on Adult Swim, would also catapult its standing within the West as well, with having the likes of Brad Swale voicing Light Yagami, Alessandro Giuliani as L, Shannon Chen Kent as Misa, and Brian Drummond as Ryuk. The voice work done by everyone within the show shined through and immersed audiences within the characters and the world. Carl Willems, the English dialogue director for Death Note, felt that with the audition process, the voice actors had to be helped additionally to where they wanted the voice for Light to be, but with Brad Swale, it came to him naturally. They would soon cast him as the English voice of Light. All of the right pieces fell into place for Madhouse with the adaptation of Death Note. The name of it alone reached places not even the studio would be aware of, news stations and the like. Death Note has become a cultural phenomenon, so much so that it would even be referenced directly by The Simpsons in the 33rd Treehouse of Horror special many years later. Even going so far as to have DR Movie, the South Korean animation studio that worked alongside Madhouse in producing Death Note, to animate the scenes for The Simpsons. Madhouse would have international success, but nothing of this caliber so far. They were becoming a force to be reckoned with within the anime sphere, and they would only continue making more and more shows. Studio Madhouse during this time would also lend their hand in animating episodes 5 to 7 of Hellsing Ultimate, working alongside other studios for the project. Madhouse would go on to produce the cult classic known as Black Lagoon. Black Lagoon would debut on April 9, 2006, and like other animes mentioned, would also be featured on Adult Swim's Toonami block in March 22, 2014. Not before premiering on Starz Edge's Anna Midnight block in 2008. Black Lagoon wasn't as popular as Death Note would become, but it was no slouch when it came to popularity either. Black Lagoon wasn't a traditional anime in the slightest and went more in the western direction. It having popularity in the West would almost be a given, and for its English release, it would also share Brad Swale's talents as the main character. Black Lagoon would run for 3 seasons, with the 3rd season titled Roberta's Blood Trail, which came out on June 27, 2010 to June 22, 2011, which consisted of 5 OVAs. Black Lagoon's manga is still in serialization, but no word of a return to the anime has been made at this time. Madhouse would help with the production of Bleach the movie Memories of Nobody. They helped primarily with the background of the film. Madhouse would also help with the other films in the Bleach series. Now, jumping into 2007, Madhouse would make an anime adaptation of Gambling Apocalypse Kaiji to Kaiji Ultimate Survivor. Kaiji would have 2 seasons, with the last episode airing on September 28, 2011. Kaiji was another one of those shows with a cult following, but would still follow through with the high quality stories Madhouse had an eye for adapting. 2007 came with the adaptation of the dark fantasy Shonen Jump title Claymore. It ran for 26 episodes on April 4, 2007 to September 26, 2007. Funimation would handle the licensing for the English dub. Coming into the late 2000s and 2008, Madhouse would animate more Western media. Ultraviolet Code 44, an anime which was based on the 2006 movie Ultraviolet, would be directed by Osamu Dezaki. And a bigger project that would be animated was Batman Gotham Knight, where they would animate episodes 4 and 6 of the anthology film. In 2009, Mamoru Hosoda would return with Madhouse to produce the film titled Summer Wars. After the success of The Girl Who Leapt Through Time, Madhouse was requested to follow up with another new film. Summer Wars follows the story of a teenage boy named Kenji who is heavily involved in an online community called Oz. After Natsuki, the girl that he likes, asks him to be her fiancé for a family gathering, he gets a math riddle in the mail that would send a rogue AI to use Oz to destroy the real world. Kenji must now save the world with his newfound family against the force of Oz. Summer Wars would go on to make $18,353,560 at the box office, another hit from Mamoru Hosoda and Studio Madhouse. The films wouldn't stop there. Studio Madhouse would also release another movie called Redline, releasing on August 14, 2009 at the Locarno International Film Festival and officially on October 9, 2010 in Japan. Redline would be the very definition of a cult classic for the studio. The sci-fi action racing film would gross over $214,180 worldwide and would sadly underperform at the box office, but it would see more success in home releases. Redline took 7 years to be made, having stated to have used 100,000 hand-drawn frames of animation. Redline would be praised for how visually striking the film would be and how different it would look comparatively to other films at the time. Madhouse had a dominant reign over the 2000s, showing us the range of shows and movies they'd produced. From classics to cult classics, Madhouse was making content to be appreciated in every form, and the 2010s would be no different. Entering into a new decade, the more HD era, Madhouse was not letting up with the shows they would produce. In 2010, Madhouse would return to the world of Trigun in Trigun Badlands Rumble. Badlands Rumble would release on April 24, 2010, written by the mangaka himself, Yasuhiro Naito. In 2010, Tetsuo Araki would be back as director behind the cult classic zombie ecchi series, High School of the Dead. Araki showcasing more of his directing chops, it would take the show itself to newer heights, primarily for the bullet time scene which the show was notorious for. The scene, however, he would shed some light on earlier this year. Araki revealed that this scene was actually done by Takayuki Hirao. He stated that, "I asked him to do something interesting with the breasts. I was furious and then let it pass, saying, what an utterly outrageous guy." Sword Art Online director Tomohiko Ito stated that Araki made a pie chart when he was directing High School of the Dead. He stated that, "This work is split into 1/3 boobs and 1/3 zombies, so the remaining 1/3 is action." 2010 would have an adaptation of the hit American TV show Supernatural in anime form. The anime ran for 1 season with 22 episodes, starring the cast of Supernatural reprising their roles for the anime. Now, Madhouse has undertaken comic book adaptations before, but this was a little different this go around. In 2010, Marvel Anime was announced as an anthology of 4 animated TV series, all done by Studio Madhouse, as a collaborative effort between them, Marvel Entertainment, and Sony Pictures Entertainment Japan. The 4 shows that would be made were Iron Man, Wolverine, X-Men, and Blade. The purpose of these shows was to reimagine the popular Western superheroes for the Japanese audiences. Each part of the anthology would go on for 12 episodes apiece. There would be 2 follow-up films for these series called Iron Man Rise of Technovore and Avengers Confidential Black Widow and Punisher, releasing in 2013 and 2014. 2011 would be another big year for Madhouse, as it would mark the second adaptation of Yoshihiro Togashi's classic manga, Hunter x Hunter. Even though this would be the second adaptation of said work, it would have zero connection to the original 90s adaptation. It was going to be a complete fresh start for the series. Starting at the very beginning of the manga, Hunter x Hunter would be a very notable anime during the years it would air. Hunter x Hunter would stop airing on September 24, 2014 due to it catching up to the manga chapters at the time. Madhouse, fervently wanting to adapt the story of Hunter x Hunter to the best of its ability, it has not continued the series with filler, opting to keep it faithful to the source material. Although newer chapters have come out for Hunter x Hunter, and with Togashi's ailing health, no word has been made on the return of the anime for Hunter x Hunter. Before we jump into 2012, there is a big change that happens to the studio around this time. I mentioned it earlier, but in June 2011, Maruyama would leave Madhouse and create Studio Mappa. In an interview with Anime Herald, Maruyama was asked what made him leave Madhouse and start up Mappa. Maruyama responded and said, "I was with Madhouse for 30 years, and in the 30 years, it had become a very large organization, and there was little freedom left in the things that I worked on. And because I wanted to do things that I wanted to do, I decided to create a separate company, Mappa, and leave Madhouse so that I could work on what I wanted to work on. Personally, large organization with little freedom is not my taste. I'd rather be working on things that I want to work on with people that I get along with." Masao Maruyama was a man and a figure that deserved respect wherever he was, for establishing Madhouse's footing in the 80s and overseeing numerous projects within the company, working on shows like Trigun or Black Lagoon, all having their place in Western media. Having attended several conventions to be in touch with the fan base, Maruyama always had an eye for what was going on around him. Helping the likes of Mamoru Hosoda, Satoshi Kon, influential people in their own right, Masao Maruyama is a name that will never be forgotten. 2012 would mark the release of Batum. Batum would run for 12 episodes on October 4, 2012 to December 20, 2012. Batum would be fairly popular internationally, but still not on the same level as other shows prior, or even a particular one coming up in just a bit. October 3rd, 2013 would mark the adaptation of Ace of Diamond, which would be produced by both Studio Madhouse and Production IG. Ace of Diamond went for 2 seasons, with his last episode being on March 31st, 2020. 2014 had notable animes coming out from Madhouse. April 9th was the release of No Game No Life. The anime would make its rounds, with the opening being one of the most viewed openings on YouTube. No Game No Life ran for 1 season, with a film released on July 15, 2017 called No Game No Life 0. Of course, during this time, there's been no word on a second season of No Game No Life. Irregular at Magic High School, also releasing in the same month as No Game No Life, airing from April 6, 2014 to September 28, 2014. Irregular at Magic High School would have multiple seasons, but Madhouse would only provide the animation for the very first season. On October 9, 2014, we would get an anime adaptation of Hitoshi Iwaki's classic Parasite called Parasite the Maxim. Parasite would be loved abroad by the many that watched it. The body horror spectacle of the series was a big selling point with audiences. Madhouse's range would continue to flourish with the adaptations they were taking up. 2015 would be a phenomenal year for Madhouse anime, almost rivaling the impact Death Note would have in 2006. Death Parade would release this year. Death Parade would actually originate from a short film Madhouse did back in 2013 called Death Billiards, which was a part of the 2013 anime Mirai project I mentioned back in my Studio Trigger deep dive video. Death Parade was an anime original which ran from January 9, 2015 to March 27, 2015. It was a breakout show, and it being an anime original had the effect of being a weekly television show everyone would be fresh for, seeing as it's not based around source material. 2015 would also give birth to an isekai juggernaut known as Overlord. Isekai being a very popular genre, Overlord having debuted in the year as the genre was still getting its footing, it would be a standout in the medium. Overlord would eventually be a part of the comedy chibi crossover Isekai Quartet, alongside series like Re:Zero, The Saga of Tani the Evil, and Konosuba. As big as Overlord would become, it would not be the biggest show under Madhouse this year. That title would go to One Punch Man. Shingo Natsume, the series director of the anime, had a group of friends that would help produce the episodes. Ryu Nakayama, who provided the key animation for episode 2, who would also go on to direct Chainsaw Man years later. Shun Enokido would also provide key animation on episode 2 and 10. Gosei Oda would deliver on key animation on episode 9, was the animation director of episodes 4, 8, and 12, the character design assistant on episodes 1 and 4, and along with being animation director, he would provide more key animation for episodes 1, 4, and 12. Sejun Kim was the team assembled for this one project was bound to be a visual goldmine, and it definitely was. One Punch Man made waves not only in the anime sphere but in the mainstream one as well. Its impact is still felt today. The next few years we'd see more adaptations and originals. Prince of Stride was adapted in 2016 based on a light novel. 2018 gave us A Place Further in the Universe, which is an anime original. Afterloss released in 2019, which was another adaptation, this time from a mobile game. No Guns Life also releasing in 2019, which would be an adaptation from a manga. Madhouse, as we've seen, were behind many monumental projects during their time. From humble beginnings to rising to momentous occasions, Madhouse is a name etched into the minds of anime fans all over, but what are they doing now? 2021 they released Sunny Boy, which is another anime original. In 2022 they released a film called Goodbye Don Glees, another original work. And in 2023 Madhouse would give us the immensely popular anime Frieren Beyond Journey's End. At the time of this recording, Frieren just released their last episode for season 1, stunning audiences alike with the animation quality as well as the narrative. To Studio Madhouse, you've been a part of many people's lives. Your shows have been able to reach across an international sphere, gaining fans all across countries, and to the masterful founders behind the company, everything wouldn't have been possible without their efforts. So, to Studio Madhouse, for being a studio that took risks and ultimately became a legend in their own right. Hey y'all, it's Leon, and this is a pretty long video. There was so much to cover, and of course, I didn't get exactly everything the company has done, or else I'd be here for another millennia, but I hope you all enjoyed the video, and tell me in the comments which Madhouse anime was your personal favorite. Let me know, and I'll be seeing you all next time. Studio WIT is a name that has exploded onto the anime sphere since they were formed, a studio that hasn't been around for as long as many other studios but has a legacy behind them that is widely respected in the realm of entertainment. In such a short amount of time, only being around for 12 years, Studio WIT has amassed success that can only be dreamed of. For having a consistent quality of high-level animation for not a relatively large studio, Studio WIT has been a name and brand synonymous with a vast level of execution. Hey, it's Leon Brando, and today we're going to be going over the animation powerhouse known as Studio WIT. This is a studio that absolutely burst onto the scene from the jump, and we're going to see how they were able to do all of the magnificent things they've been able to achieve over the years. So without further ado, here is the Anime Studio Deep Dive, Studio WIT. To start from the beginning of WIT's creation, we have to look at the company it was birthed from, Production IG. Now, Production IG is yet another studio that's heralded for their work, making the likes of Mamoru Oshii's classic film Ghost in the Shell to works like Psycho-Pass or Kuroko's Basketball, and with these works being produced by several staff, it would be George Wada who would get the ball rolling. Wada was an employee for Production IG, having worked on numerous projects under the company such as Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex Solid State Society, Kimi no Todoke, Aoshi, and others. But before he would dive into the animation world, George Wada would actually go to law school. He actually had no prospects of ever going into the animation field. After realizing that studying in the Faculty of Law was not for him, he shifted his sights over to working at Cisco, the IT company. But just like when he was studying at the Faculty of Law, he came to the conclusion that he wanted to pursue a different avenue, stating that working at Cisco, they had to sell products made by the US to then sell to Japan, but he wanted to do the exact opposite, wanting to sell Japanese products on a global scale. This would lead him into the animation sphere, having met the president of production IG Mitsuhisa Ishikawa as he was giving a lecture at a seminar Wada was attending. He noticed that Japanese culture is widely accepted across the globe and realized that through the scope of animation, he would be able to see his dream come to fruition. George Wada would join Production IG in 2005. Wada would stay with Production IG for 7 years until he felt it was time to take a new step within his career. He wanted to create a studio of his own. George Wada went to the president of Production IG, Mitsuhisa Ishikawa, about the idea. Ishikawa then asked Wada on whether or not he was going to focus on founding a company or focusing on the production side of things. Wada answered with production, and Ishikawa made an offer to him to start a company as an affiliate of IG, stating that seeing as the industry was the way that it was, he'd need funding and said he would invest in the company. Of course, Wada wouldn't found WIT all on his own. He would co-found Studio WIT alongside Tetsuya Nakatake. Wada met Nakatake at Production IG. Nakatake served as an animation producer at IG, working on Kimi no Todoke, Sengoku Basa, Guilty Crown, and others. After shifting through multiple field ventures, it was fully time to get the ball rolling on a new and more worthwhile career path, something that was going to change the landscape of anime. Wada would accept the offer and Studio WIT would be founded on June 1st, 2012. Wada would clarify that while he's listed as the president for Studio WIT, he was actually doing production. He was in charge of producing the animes, finding the right people, the amount of money needed for the project, on top of receiving approval for original productions if need be. Wada stated, "In the beginning, WIT Studio was just one single room in Production IG, a room without any windows. In the beginning, there were 5 people. Because I was originally in Production IG, by the time WIT Studio was created, there were already 2 projects lined up. One of them was an original animated movie called HAL, the other one is Attack on Titan." Wada was asked if Studio WIT has a central philosophy. Of course, any company that is created usually has one, especially fledgling companies, so they give you, the audience, an idea of what it is they're trying to achieve within the company and for the specific field that they're in. Wada responded and said, "The biggest philosophy is to create animation of a quality that fans and stakeholders would be proud of. And in addition to the quality, I also make sure that the morals and the stories are something that would be accepted by everyone in the world." With Tetsuya Nakatake, he'd also tell his tale on the origins of Studio WIT, of course harkening back to his time at Production IG. Wada would work alongside Nakatake in several projects, stating that Wada was able to bring over numerous talent for the job, and that being a strong suit of his. Kyoji Asano was another important person as well that Nakatake would speak on. Kyoji Asano was an animation director over at Production IG, working on projects like Dead Leaves as a key animator, being a key animator for Ghost in the Shell 2 Innocence, and being a key animator for episode 4 and 12 of Outlaw Star. With Asano jumping over with Nakatake and Wada to be in Studio WIT, other talents soon followed. Key animators such as Takaki Chiba, who worked on Le Chevalier d'Eon as an animation director, assistant animation director, and key animator, was a key animator for episodes 16, 21, and 26 of Planets, and was a key animator for episode 42 of Naruto. Kyohei Tezuka, who's worked on Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, where he would provide the key animation for episode 23, Bloodseed the Last Dark, where he was an animation director alongside being a key animator, and served as the key animator for episode 20 of Fire Force. Tomomi Ozaki is a designer and also animator. She'd work on shows like Gossip, where she did the illustration for episode 12, was a key animator for the opening, and provided the cover picture for episode 24, was a sub-character designer for Attack on Titan, and also for Kabaneri of the Iron Fortress. Wada was able to see his dream become a reality. With a full studio at the ready, it was time for their first ever production to unfold, and it would start with an anime everyone is very familiar with, Attack on Titan. Wada, having read the manga for Attack on Titan, felt that it was prime material for an anime adaptation. He joined up with Pony Canyon, a Japanese publishing company, and went over to Kodansha, which is the publisher for Attack on Titan, and he essentially gave them the rundown for what his plan for this series would be. Going back to Wada's company philosophy, Attack on Titan was something very true to that statement, a story about survival and that willingness to survive to help the fellow man see the following day. It was a layup for Attack on Titan to be produced by Studio WIT. Wada told Kodansha that he'd gather the best staff he could for the production, and his starting man would be Tetsuo Araki, a person I made mention on the channel before. Tetsuo Araki was known for being an immensely talented director, having handled the anime adaptation of Death Note and High School the Dead years prior. Him putting his talents as a director on full display with Attack on Titan would make the show as memorable as it is today. Now, Attack on Titan is a show that has been talked about at length since the first episode 11 years ago, but for this to be Studio WIT's first anime, I can't think of a better start for a studio. Studio WIT would produce the first episode of Attack on Titan, airing on April 7, 2013. From the first episode alone, it gripped the entertainment world. Wada would state that he was keeping a close eye on the reaction from the internet on Twitter, saying that every time an episode was aired, the impact was amazing on Twitter, and it motivated us because we wanted to respond to their expectations and wanted the audience to enjoy. We may have heightened our hurdles by ourselves. The production side of Attack on Titan is an interesting one to say the least. It is a topic also heavily discussed on the platform and of course was brought up in an interview with George Wada. Wada was asked about how the production of the show went and he had this to say on the matter. There were 25 episodes in all, and every time we could barely make it for the air date, so for the last few episodes I would take the freshly made tape, hop on an airplane to deliver it to TV stations around the nation. This is a really tough job as I had to repeat it every week. Wada was also asked about how the manga of Attack on Titan was selected for adaptation, and he answered by saying he actually saw Attack on Titan being advertised on the train, stating that, "When I actually started reading the manga and realized it was a story about people being stuck behind a wall, facing against the rest of the world, I synchronized that with my experience as a producer." Apparently, it is very important for the people who are working on something to have some sort of synchronization with the story that they work on. So, to bring a certain level of authenticity, it just so happened that Kodansha, the copyright holder of the series, was also looking for people who have a great resume to work on it. Attack on Titan would go on a meteoric rise for being one of the most popular pieces of entertainment in 2013, landing at crossovers of Marvel Entertainment with a crossover comic titled Attack on Avengers. This comic saw Titans coming out of the oceans of Manhattan while Spider-Man, Captain America, and the rest of the Avengers battled the Titans. No appearances of the main characters were shown, however, just the Titans. Other crossovers would include being DLC in Dead or Alive 5 Last Round. You get to battle on the stage of Walmaria and also be able to wear the Scout Regiment uniforms for your favorite characters. But this is just a taste of the impact it would have. WIT would produce 3 seasons of Attack on Titan, and ultimately for the final season it would have a studio change. As we know by now, Studio Mappa would be the ones to finish off the rest of the Attack on Titan series, and Wada himself would shed some light on the entire situation. It came as a shock to many at the time that WIT would not be producing the latter parts of Attack on Titan and would be produced by another studio. With that being said, however, Wada would touch on the actual process of what's happening with the development of said shows. On an interview with Anime News Network, Wada would explain that DVD sales were a factor in how these seasons would be developed, stating, "As a business model, the decision to make a sequel depended entirely on DVD sales. At that time, for all of those titles that you just mentioned, we had only been contracted for season 1. Then once the DVD sales come in, we would get an offer to do a second season based on that." Adding to that, he'd say, "At the time my management skills weren't as good as they are today, so I couldn't add the next seasons to the schedule right away because I had already had other shows lined up for funding. And of course, the fans and the publishers want to get the second season out as quickly as possible, which is what led it to being animated by another studio." Of course, times have changed where the emphasis is more put on streaming rather than Blu-ray sales, which Wada would even say in his interview. But with Attack on Titan, it was a colossal shoes to fill, pun intended, with taking over such a project. A series so widely respected, but what gave Mappa their blessing with regard to handling the show. But of course, Attack on Titan wouldn't be the only thing WIT worked on in this year. On June 8, 2013, Studio WIT would release an original film titled Howl. This romantic drama stars a girl named Kurumi who has to deal with the loss of her boyfriend. Wallowing in grief over this fact turned her life into a rather miserable one, until a scientist comes along and attempts to break Kurumi out of her shell by making a robot in the same vein as Howl. The movie deals with their relationship as the days go on. Howl would mark the directorial debut of Ryotaro Makihara. Makihara worked on shows as a key animator such as Paranoia Agent, Monster, Naruto, and was even a key animator on the opening of Blood Plus prior to his work on Howl. Michiru Oshima provided the soundtrack for Howl. She'd be in charge of scores for other projects such as Casher and Full Metal Alchemist and Little Witch Academia. Yusuke Takada was given the role of art director for the movie. Yusuke Takada had previous work as a background artist while also being an art director for shows like Evangelion, Golden Boy, and Die Buster. Atsuko Nozaki was the animation director for Howl. Nozaki would be known for her work on being a key animator for Naruto Shippuden. She would do character key animation in Evangelion 1.0, You Are Not Alone, and Tokyo Magnitude 8.0 as a character designer. In 2013, Studio WIT was able to take a manga and make it into a series juggernaut, but what about their other series? On January 10, 2014, WIT would animate the first season of Hozuki's Cool-Headedness. Hozuki's Cool-Headedness was an adaptation of a manga of the same name written by Eguchi Natsumi. It's a story about a demon bureaucrat named Hozuki who is an inhabitant of Hell and works for the god of death King Enma as he manages other demons. Hozuki has to try to fix up a lot of problems that happen to Hell's fellow inhabitants with his cool and composed behavior. Hozuki's Cool-Headedness will be animated by Studio WIT for 1 season ending on April 4, 2014. It was directed by Hiro Kaburagi, who also worked on shows like Welcome to the NHK as an episode director for episodes 5, 13, and 22, while also doing the storyboard on the second ending song along with being a storyboard artist for episode 5, 10, 14, and 22. He was also a storyboard artist for episode 9 of Hanebado, and also being a storyboard artist and episode director for Fantastic Children. Midori Goto wrote the screenplay and also served as the design manager and worked on the series composition for the anime, while Hirotaka Kato worked on the character designs on top of being the chief animation director. As for what series composition is for anime, it is essentially a role given to the main writer of the series. They meet with the director and sometimes producers during pre-production to draft the concept of the series, come up with major events, and decide how to pace it all. Hirotaka Kato also worked on iShield 21 as a character designer for episodes 112 to 145, served as the chief animation director and key animator on The Empire of Corpses, and will work on HAL as an animation director. Midori Goto worked as a scriptwriter for the second season of Bang Dream, while also providing work for Attack on Titan Junior High School as a scriptwriter and was in charge of series composition, while also doing work on Genshiken Nadaime as a scriptwriter. Tetsuya Nakatake would be the animation producer behind the project as well. Even though Studio Dean would take over production for the second season, a fair amount of the staff still remained the same and worked on the project thereafter. Midori Goto was still the scriptwriter for the second season and was in charge of the series composition. January 11, 2015 saw the release of Studio WIT's first original anime, The Rolling Girls. The Rolling Girls is a story about Japan being split up into independent nations after the Great Tokyo War. A prophet has total control over said nations, which are called Mosa, an entire army called Mob. 4 girls, a part of said mob, have to travel to Japan to settle disputes going on around the nation. George Wada would handle the planning for Rolling Girls, while also being the producer. The Rolling Girls ran for 1 season ending on March 29, 2015. Tetsuya Nakatake also worked on this project as the animation director. Kotomi Dei would be the director for The Rolling Girls. Her past work includes being an assistant episode director and worked on storyboarding for Ergo Proxy. She was also a production assistant on Samurai Champloo and worked on Michiko and Hachin as an episode director and on storyboards. Katsuhiko Kitado was a character designer on the show. You'll know him from works like Gurren Lagann, where he was a key animator. He was also a key animator for Evangelion 2.0 You Cannot Advance, and was a key animator for Banana Fish. Although The Rolling Girls isn't WIT's biggest anime to date, it wouldn't be the last time they would create an original work. On April 4, 2015, the anime adaptation of Seraph of the End would debut, based on the manga by Takaya Kagami. George Wada was again in charge of planning and produced the anime. Tetsuya Nakatake would serve as the animation producer. Seraph of the End was about a virus that kills off anyone that isn't under the age of 13, and said children were then taken into captivity by vampires, and one boy's fight against his captors. Hiroshi Seko, a very well-known man within the anime sphere, worked on this project as well, working on titles like Mob Psycho 100, where he'd write the script and did the series composition for every season. He worked as a scriptwriter and production assistant for Panty and Stocking, and Jujutsu Kaisen as a scriptwriter, and worked on series composition. Even at this earlier point in his career, his past projects made him no stranger to more action-oriented series, especially with Seraph of the End being a jump title, so he'd be best suited to work on this action series. Hiroyuki Sawano would provide the music for the opening. I've talked about Sawano's musical contributions to the anime world before, but Seraph of the End would be another show under his belt. Takuma Ebisu, who was originally a part of Production IG, worked on this project as well. Currently he's an employee of WIT, a part of their main staff, but he helped with the prop design and was a main animator on Seraph of the End. His other works include being a key animator on Kizumonogatari Part 1, served as a key animator on Fate Stay Night Unlimited Blade Works 2nd season, and of course worked on being an action animator, key animator, animation director, and many other titles on the first 3 seasons of Attack on Titan. Megumi Tomita was a main animator for Seraph of the End, alongside being a key animator and assistant animation director. Also, she's someone that is employed at Studio WIT to this very day, and her work would include Blood Blockade Battlefront, where she was a key animator and animation director. She'd work on the 3rd Madoka Magica movie as a key animator. Megumi Tomita would also lend her talents to After the Rain as a key animator on episode 10. Takafumi Wada would be in charge of the score for Seraph of the End. He'd also provide work on soundtracks for other anime such as High School of the Dead, Seven Deadly Sins, Ride Back, and Thunderbolt Fantasy. On October 2nd, 2015, Ryotaro Makihara will be back in the director's seat for the release of The Empire of Corpses. The Empire of Corpses was an adaptation of the same name written by the late Project Ito, real name Satoshi Ito. Satoshi Ito was a science fiction writer and essayist befriending the likes of Hideo Kojima. Ito's novel, The Empire of Corpses, would release on August 12, 2012, 3 years after his death. Ito's work would then be adapted into 3 films across 3 different anime studios, with the first one being animated by Studio WIT. The Empire of Corpses is a story about a man named John Watson, a man who lives in 19th century Europe where human corpses called Frankensteins live amongst human beings but are given souls and forced to work to uphold the industrial development of his town. Hiroyuki Tanaka would be the assistant director on this project. Tanaka would make his directorial debut on Claymore. Other products like X, Vampire Hunter, Cardcaptor Sakura, he'd be an episode director for those works. Takaki Chiba served as the character designer for the film alongside Tomoyuki Yamasaki, who was the original character designer for the work. Now with regard to what these roles are, I'll explain. See, an original character designer is the person that designed the character originally, i.e. being the source material. This serves as the basis for what the character should look like, and the character designer uses this as a reference and helps to bring this look to life for the animators. Yusuke Takada would also be the art director for this film as well, returning back into that role for yet another project. Also, because I personally found this interesting, Tomoyuki Yamasaki would eventually go on to design Hololive EN's V-Singer Iris years later. Just felt like throwing that in there. The Empire of Corpses would get a limited theatrical release over here in the West, licensed by now defunct company Funimation. It was released on April 19th and 20th, 2016. It would make $43,320 at the box office. WIT would also dabble into the video game scene as well. On April 20th, 2016, WIT would collaborate with Nintendo and release an animated short for Star Fox Zero called Star Fox Zero: The Battle Begins. This would be based on the Star Fox rail shooter game they released the day after the short was made. Kyoji Asano, Yusuke Takada, and Takuma Ebisu would all return for the project. Kyoji Asano would direct the short while also handling the storyboard. Eiji Umehara was tasked with handling the script. His prior works would be a scriptwriter for Re:Zero, and he was a scriptwriter for Episode 3 of Halo Legend, and was a production assistant on Shin-Chan. Takuma Ebisu was the key animator for the short, and the one and the only Shigeru Miyamoto was an executive producer for the project as well. Yusuke Takada would be behind the art direction for it too. Star Fox Zero: The Battle Begins was a prequel to the Star Fox Zero game, telling the story of Fox McCloud and the gang banding together to save General Pepper from Andross. WIT would venture into video games again, but more on that later. On April 8th, 2016 would mark the year when the anime original series Kabaneri of the Iron Fortress would release. The highly stylized fantasy action drama would be under the directorial eye of Tetsuro Araki. A series like this was something Tetsuro Araki could elevate given his track record, and of course, this fitting into genres that he's very well versed in. Seeing as Attack on Titan bolstered his success and popularity, he was undoubtedly the right person for the task of bringing this series to new heights. And speaking of new heights, Hiroyuki Sawano would be attached to another WIT project by making the soundtrack for the show. A series like this not only being directed by Araki but also having a score done by Sawano, WIT knew how to assemble stacked teams for their projects. Haruhiko Mikimoto was in charge of the original character design for the show, and this was something that Tetsuo Araki himself pushed for. In an interview with Full Frontal Moe, Araki was asked how he was able to land Haruhiko Mikimoto for Kabaneri, and he stated that, "At WIT Studio, there are many animators specialized in animating action scenes. We wanted to emphasize their work. We also wanted to produce an animation which would satisfy the current watchers. That's when we asked ourselves, how about doing animation which would look old without feeling old? We took inspiration from several shows from the 80s, and that's how we ended up asking Mikimoto to participate in the conceptual character design." Kabaneri of the Iron Fortress is a story about a group of survivors that seek refuge on a train but would later be attacked by monsters called the Kabane. Kabaneri of the Iron Fortress was a project that felt very personal to Tetsuo Araki. He'd take inspiration from Gundam, a series he fell in love with as a child, to try and incorporate what he loves into this show. He'd state that, "The series was loaded with themes that I enjoy, and everything just happened to turn out that way. There were only two main themes I had in mind when I was coming up with the basic setting. One was to make the series historical, and the other was to ensure that transportation took place in Hayajiro, a type of armored steam train. All the other elements are based on those two themes and came naturally as I continued to think. I thought about how the characters would live and how they would fight. It wasn't like I was trying to pack in as many elements and themes as possible. On the contrary, the importance of preventing the story from becoming one where anything goes was always in the back of my mind." Yoko Matsuzaki would supervise Kabaneri. Her other works would include being a chief producer on Erased, was in charge of production on Ping Pong the Animation, and was a chief producer of Your Lie in April. Eiichiro Okochi is another important name to be mentioned for the production of Kabaneri. He would work on the series composition for the show. Okochi is mainly known for being the co-creator of Code Geass. He'd also write the script for Azumanga Daioh alongside writing an episode for Space Dandy. Araki would talk at length about the characterization of the show. He'd say that, "Basically, I'm a person who enjoys stories about the audible crumbling of ordinary life under the effects of a calamity. Similarly, I also like people who are driven into corners by the adversity they face. In this series, the most important part was to portray the attitude of a boy who would give up his life to save a girl after he became a Kabaneri. I don't think anyone can shine brighter than a person who's ready to give up on their own life." Kabaneri of the Iron Fortress would also receive two compilation movies, one in 2016 and 2017, but then on May 10, 2019, Kabaneri would get a brand new movie titled Kabaneri of the Iron Fortress: The Battle of Yunato. Taking place half a year after the story of the show, it shows the ongoing battle between the survivors and the Kabaneri at Haiko Station. The same staff would return for the project. In 2017, Studio WIT would work on another anime called The Ancient Magus Bride. Granted, in 2016, they would make a 3-part OVA prequel leading into the anime series called The Ancient Magus Bride: Those Awaiting a Star. George Wado would be the producer of the anime while also being in charge of the planning for the show as well. Norihiro Naganuma was behind the series composition on top of being the director for the show. He was also the director and key animator for the prequel OVAs as well. Norihiro Naganuma worked on projects like Welcome to the Space Show on the image board for the movie, was a key animator for episode 1 of Death Note, and was a key animator on episode 16 of Moribito: Guardian of the Spirit. The creator for Ancient Magus Bride, Korei Yamazaki, sat down with Forbes and was asked about the development of the anime. Yamazaki responded by saying that, I get to oversee a lot of the art, the characters, the colors, the overall setting, but the actual drawing is all done by the animators and I'm just helping them out. She was also asked about how it felt to have a managerial role on the anime, and Yamazaki said, "I feel that I'm a part of the camaraderie of the creators of the anime and I want to help them out as part of the team." Studio WIT would do the animation for the first season of Ancient Magus Bride, releasing on October 8, 2017 and would end on March 25, 2018. Ancient Magus Bride tells the story of Chise Hattori, a girl that's been abused as long as she's been alive. With no one to run to, she feels she's at her lowest point, not until a man with a beast head retrieves her from a slave auction. The rest of the story deals with their relationship. I mentioned before that Ancient Magus Bride would only be done by WIT for Season 1 and 2016's OVA. Studio Kafka would undertake the 2021 OVAs along with the second season and the second part of the second season of the anime as well. But back into the realm of video games this time with a mobile game. Studio WIT would be the studio behind the opening animation and cutscenes for the Bandai Namco spin-off game Tales of the Raves, which is based on the Tales series. Tales of the Raves would release on February 28, 2017. On December 2nd, 2017, we would see the release of Laughing Under the Clouds Gaiden, a collaborative effort between Studio WIT and Studio Blade. Laughing Under the Clouds Gaiden was a 3-part spin-off film series based on Laughing Under the Clouds, the anime that dropped back in 2014 by Studio Doga Kobo. Laughing Under the Clouds Gaiden would be directed by Tetsuya Wakano. Tetsuya Wakano has worked on shows like Mushishi as a key animator for Episode 8. He worked on Episode 2 of Bakemonogatari as a key animator, and was a key animator for Gintama. Mainly serving as a key animator for the majority of his projects, Laughing Under the Clouds Gaiden would make it Wakano's directorial debut. Eiji Umehara would return, but this time working on the series composition for the movie. Yutaka Yamada was in charge of the soundtrack. You may know of his work on shows like Tokyo Ghoul or Vinland Saga, providing the soundtrack for both of these shows. Shoji Hata would be the sound director for the movie as well. Whether it be sound design or being a sound director, it is often a role that goes unnoticed or unappreciated by the majority of people, but it's worth mentioning because it's a very important role for you to be able to hear everything that is going on and how you hear it. His role would be to oversee all audio aspects of the movie, working on shows like One Punch Man, Space Dandy, Gogol 13, all having to do with sound directing or dealing with the recording of said work. Laughing Under the Clouds and Laughing Under the Clouds Gaiden was based on the manga of the same name written by Karakura Kimori. Laughing Under the Clouds Gaiden is about the ramifications of the Great War against the Orochi. Tenka Kumua was paralyzed from the waist down. He has taken the time now to isolate himself from society. Of course, his squad and his brothers try to contact him in any way, but the story unfolds as they find out the secrets dealing with Tenko's past. Laughing Under the Clouds Gaiden Chapter 2 would release on June 9, 2018, and Chapter 3 would release on September 1st, 2018. And speaking of 2018, January 10th, 2018 would mark the release of After the Rain, based on the manga written by Jun Mayusuke. After the Rain is about a girl named Akira Tachibana who was the absolute best on the track club until an injury was so bad it forced her to retire from the sport, and she meets a man named Masami Kondo, a man that manages the restaurant where Akira works at. Masami is also a divorced dad as well and is an aspiring writer. Akira ends up falling in love for Masami, and the story deals with her deciding on whether or not she'll eventually tell him her feelings. After the Rain would go on for one season ending on March 30th, 2018. Ayumu Watanabe would be the director for this show. Past works include doing the storyboard for episode 19 of Azumanga Daioh, did the key animation for Doraemon, the record of Nobita's parallel visit to the West, among various other Doraemon projects, and he worked on the storyboard of Negima. Hitomi Mieno, also known as Deko Akao, also worked on After the Rain. She did the series composition for it. Hitomi Mieno is a singer, songwriter, scriptwriter, and radio personality. She's been making music as early as 13 years old in 1994. Her music has been used for several anime openings, shows like Legend of Crystania, Great Fighter Dendo, Mashin Hero Wataru. Shows she's done scripts for are Fresh Precure, Bakugan Battle Brawlers, and Arakawa Under the Bridge. Hitomi Mieno wrote the script for episodes 1, 2, 3, 7, 11, and 12, working alongside Eiji Umehara, who would write the script for episodes 5, 8, and 9. The widely known and immensely talented Ame would provide the vocals for the ending song of After the Rain. Ame would do the ending song 29 for Bleach, perform the opening for Fate Stay Night Unlimited Blade Works, and even did the ending song for the 5th season of Natsume's Book of Friends. Yuka Shibata would do the character design for the anime. She's worked on projects like Fooly Cooly as an in-between animator on episode 5 and 6, Spirited Away doing in-between animation, and worked on Die Busted as animation director, character animation director, assistant animation director, and other roles for that show. Studio WIT, once again no stranger to video games, did the opening animation for BlazBlue Cross Tag Battle. BlazBlue Cross Tag Battle being the 2D anime crossover fighting game developed by Arc System Works, spanning from several different IPs such as Ununited Birth, Persona 4, Ruby, and more. BlazBlue Cross Tag Battle will release on May 31st, 2018. That wasn't the only game that they worked on during this year. Studio WIT would do the opening animation and all cutscenes for the mobile game Princess Connect Redive. On July 13, 2018, Studio WIT would collaborate with Studio OLM for Pokemon the movie The Power of Us. It would be the 21st Pokemon movie made. Eiji Umehara makes another return and would work on this film as a scriptwriter and worked on script composition as well. Aya Takaha worked on the script as well. Her other works would include being a scriptwriter on Ancient Magus Bride and episode 12 of Psycho Pass. Yuko Kato served as one of 36 animation directors for the movie. Her past works would be as an animation director, chief animation director, and key animator for Kakegurui. She was an in-between animator for Evangelion 3.0 You Cannot Redo. She was also a key animator on episode 20 of Parappa the Rapper. Takashi Otsuka worked on the storyboard. He was an episode director and did the storyboard for episode 17 of Haikyuu, did the storyboard for multiple episodes of Attack on Titan Junior High School, and will go on to be the director, worked on storyboard and the screenplay of One Piece Stampede. Yoshikazu Miyao also worked on the storyboard as well. His other works would be providing the storyboard for episode 4, 13, and 21 of Fate Apocrypha, was an episode director, did the monster design, and even provided the storyboard for Final Fantasy Unlimited. And he was an animation director, episode director, and did the storyboard for Hellsing. Shizue Kaneko, the character designer for The Power of Us, was interviewed on the film. She was asked about how she would describe her character designs, and she responded with this. It depends on the work, but with Pokemon I was aiming for simple and realistic designs, with characters wearing clothes a real person might actually wear. Also, the director told me to draw things with my usual touch, and I normally draw things with a soft and gentle atmosphere. If only I had more time, I would have stuck at it a little more, but that's for my satisfaction. Pokemon the movie The Power of Us would earn a staggering $23,740,788 at the box office worldwide. It doesn't come as a shock considering Pokemon is the #1 piece of media in the entire world. Congrats to the team behind the project. 2019 was a substantial year for Studio WIT. They would be the ones at the helm of the adaptation of a manga classic known as Vinland Saga. Vinland Saga is a manga with a lot of respect and universal praise surrounding the work, and Studio WIT was up to the task to provide the animation for season 1. Vinland Saga, written by Makoto Yukimura, is a story about Thorfinn's quest to avenge his dad and to murder his killer Askeladd. He travels with him as a part of his crew with the intention of hopefully slaying him in battle. Crunchyroll conducted an interview with Shuhei Yabuta, the director for Vinland Saga, alongside the author Yukimura and Hiroshi Seko, who was behind the series' composition. When asked about the anime original scenes, Hiroshi Seko stated that, "When I was developing the series outline, I told Yabuta I wanted to show it in chronological order to illustrate Thorfinn's growth." Yabuta responded saying, "And that really made sense to me, so I agreed. That's why we ended up putting bits of Thorfinn growing up in episodes 5 and 6. I was interested in seeing how a 6-year-old would survive after being suddenly taken in by a Viking band, and I also wanted to see how Thorfinn grew from a gentle boy into the young man he becomes." Yabuta would go on to say, "The end of episode 6 is a scene in East Anglia taken from the manga, so we had to have scenes for Thorfinn leading up to that point, establishing how his character developed. In episode 5, he showed how he gained the ability to survive, and how he made his contract with Askeladd. In episode 6, we revealed the process of how Thorfinn gained the ability to fight as well as his internal things in East Anglia. I thought the scene showed him truly stepping into the world of battle as part of Askeladd's band, showing his transformation into a warrior." Vinland Saga Season 1 would premiere on July 8, 2019, and would conclude on December 30th, 2019. Takahiko Abaru would provide the character design for Vinland Saga, with Kenji Wasaka and Tatsubori Emoto as the sub-character designers for the anime. Takahiko Abaru worked on the second key animation for Redline. He did the second key animation for Iron Man Rise of Technovore, and was the in-between checker for Paprika. Studio Bamboo worked on the background art for Vinland Saga. The themes of Vinland Saga spoke to the team and there was a genuine love for the source material. Hiroshi Seko would speak more on the success of the anime. He'd say that, "I believe the strength of the source material played a big role in getting so many people to watch the anime. There are plenty of movies and novels featuring Vikings, but it's rare for the protagonist to be one young boy. I think that's one of the distinctions that helps Vinland Saga stand out from the pack." I said it earlier in the video, but WIT would only develop the first season of Vinland Saga. They would pass on the anime to Studio Mappa. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, it was due to the scheduling conflicts mainly as to why Studio WIT couldn't foresee the other seasons of Vinland Saga. However, a lot of the staff from the first season would work alongside Mappa on the production of season 2 of Vinland Saga. Shuhei Yabuta would still be the director, Hiroshi Seko was still in charge of series composition, Yusuke Takada was still the art director, and Takahiro Abaru was still doing the character design. On September 10, 2019, Studio WIT would work on an OVA titled The Girl from the Other Side. The Girl from the Other Side was based on the manga of the same name written by Nagabe. This OVA was bundled with the limited edition of the manga's 8th volume. Satomi Maya was the director for the OVA and also did the storyboard for it. She worked on various animated music videos such as Ribbon, Suyoku, and Clone. She was the director for Ribbon and Suyoku and would be a key animator for Clone. Some of the staff that worked on this OVA had only ever done a bit of works prior to the OVA, getting more fresh faces onto a smaller project like this. Working alongside Satomi Maya was the director Yutaru Kubo, who would also work on the same projects as Satomi Maya. George Wada would also be on this project but as a planner. Mitsushisa Ishikawa was an executive producer on this project, seeing as production IG would help produce the OVA. The Girl from the Other Side was about a world split into two realms, but inside both realms, said inhabitants are told not to wander into the other realm or else to suffer a curse. Shiva, a girl living on the other side of the realm, lives with a guardian who is also a demon known as Teacher. Shiva and the Teacher aren't allowed to touch one another, but they embark on a journey to find Shiva's grandmother. The OVA was only 10 minutes long. On June 2nd, 2020, WIT would produce an anime original called Great Pretender. Hiro Kaburagi would return to direct this project. He was also the episode director for episode 1 and directed the ending song. Hiro Kaburagi would also work on the storyboard for the ending song in episode 1 and 2. Great Pretender is about a man named Makoto Edamura who is touted as Japan's greatest swindler. After he attempts to scam a French tourist in Japan, he gets sent to Los Angeles and the story deals with him working with said French tourist on a multitude of scams across the world. Serving as the assistant director for Great Pretender, we have Ryuji Masuyama. He worked in the amazing world of Arrietty as a key animator, worked on the storyboard for Promare. He was also director, episode director, key animator, and storyboard artist for Blend S. Ryota Kosawa, the writer, was interviewed on Anime News Network about Great Pretender, and he was asked about how the process was for creating a series for Netflix. Kosawa says, "For a normal television series, it is difficult to deliver every episode before the date of the first broadcast, but I'm glad this time we were given a schedule that allowed us to make the delivery just in time." Also, Great Pretender has a lot of characters who can speak multiple languages, so the non-Japanese languages are mainly dubbed overseas and mixed with the audio at sound editing stage. As for who puts in the money for those parts, I think it comes from the Netflix budget, and there's an understanding from companies related to the work from the Japanese side. I'm very grateful that an environment was established where we could easily create the anime. Yoshiyuki Sadamano did the character design for Great Pretender. You'll know his art style primarily from Evangelion and Fooly Cooly, where he did the character design for both shows. They were even asked if Sadamano's art style would clash with the background art style, and Kodama would respond with, "Because the story is based on the real world, I wasn't worried that Mr. Sadamano's character designs would clash with the background art style. If anything, I had more apprehensions that the colors would clash rather than the designs. It's the job of the color design section to coordinate the colors and the characters with the artboards." George Water reached out to Ryota Kosawa and they had this to say.
そうですね、テレビドラマや映画を普段は描いているので、アニメはとっても興味があったんですけど、なかなかちょっと怖い部分がよく知らない世界ということもあって、悩んでいた時期もあったんですけど、この和田さんがとっても前向きに人をこう乗せてくれて、やる気にさせてくれて、ですごいこうチームを作ってくれたんで、やってよかったなと今すごく思ってます。
Wada stated that Kosawa made it comedy-based, and due to him having written great comedies in the past, he had to reach out to him. Kosawa said he had written the script for Great Pretender as early as 2014. Great Pretender was a very interesting series for Studio WIT to tackle, an anime that wasn't Japanese in nature at all. It started a Japanese main character, but the entirety of Great Pretender had a very diverse cast with several characters having different ethnicities. Yoshiyuki Sadamano talks about this when asked how the research process was for American characters or characters that weren't Japanese. Sadamano said he'd use actors as references for the character backgrounds, but not any particular actor. In an interview with My Anime List, Hiro Kaburagi would further elaborate on this question of research for the show, saying that we're all based in Japan, so we don't have a very clear image of what the foreign countries that are in our stories are like. The research was a lot of work and was quite tough. I think our image of some of these foreign countries is still somewhat hazy, but it's a really fun story, if you could look past some parts that aren't quite accurate. Great Pretender was created for mass appeal, not having just the Japanese audience be the ones put the primary focus set on them, but rather everyone across the world could enjoy the product. Studio WIT felt strongly about this particular project. Seeing as it's an anime original, they're allowed free reign over the process of the show, but they acknowledge this is also a challenge in and of itself, seeing as there's no reference point or prior following to the work. Great Pretender would run for 23 episodes, with the first 14 episodes airing on August 20th, 2020, and the last 9 episodes airing on November 25th, 2020. This was only the case for places outside of Netflix Japan. Great Pretender also has the privilege of being the only anime to exist with an ending song performed by the late legend himself, Freddie Mercury. The song, of course, would be none other than The Great Pretender. Great Pretender would receive a movie in 2024 called Great Pretender Razblyudo. It was in theaters earlier this year on January 9th and the 10th in select theaters in the US. Hiro Kaburagi would still be the director for this project. Mai Tashima was the assistant director for Razblyudo. She was an in-between animator for Nekomonogatari Kuro for episodes 1, 3, and 4, also an in-between animator for Steins Gate the Movie Load Region of Deja Vu, and for Detective Conan Zero the Enforcer. Great Pretender Razblyudo, having released in only 25 US theaters, it made $22,624 at the box office. Ryota Kosawa instead would be in the script supervisor role, whereas Taku Kishimoto was helping with series composition. Taku Kishimoto having worked on the Fruits Basket remake, Hanebado, and Erase as a scriptwriter. In December of 2020, Studio WIT would start up a stop-motion animation studio within WIT. Who they started with was the director of the short web series Poi Poi Molcar. Studio WIT is still recruiting members for the studio to this day. April 3rd, 2021 marked the release of Vivi Fluorite's Ice Song, an anime original series created by Eiji Umehara and Teppei Nagatsuki, the creator of ReZero. A series already high on anticipation just with the names of the studio attached to the project alone. Shinpei Izaki, an employee from Production IG, would be appointed as the director for the show and would direct the ending song along with episodes 9 and 13 for the anime. His past work includes being the episode director for episode 21 of Banana Fish. He was an episode director for episodes 17 and 22 of Blue Exorcist, and would have directorial work on Gunslinger Stratos. Yusuke Kubo was the assistant director on Vivi. He's worked on the storyboard and was a director for the 8th episode of Goblin Slayer. He'd worked on the storyboard and was an episode director for episodes 29 and 35 of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Golden Wind. And he worked on Steins Gate Zero as an episode director, storyboard, and on storyboard assistance. Satoru Kosaki would provide the score for Vivi. His other work on soundtracks would include shows like the Monogatari series, The Melancholy of Haru Suzumiya, Beastars, and Fate Extra Last Encore. Yusuke Takada was in charge of the art direction, and Yuichi Takahashi was behind the character design. Yuichi Takahashi was a key animator on Promare, a key animator for Mob Psycho 100's opening for Season 1, and was an animation director, character designer, and chief animation director for Fooly Cooly Alternative. His work on Vivi would include being the animation director, chief animation director, and key animator. With Vivi being a time travel story, getting someone as prominent in the genre as Teppei Nagatsuki would be extremely beneficial. When asked on an interview with Nippon about Nagatsuki's involvement with the anime, Eiji Umehara had this to say. I was a part of the scriptwriting team for the anime adaptation of Nagatsuki's ReZero Starting Life in Another World. After reading the light novels and speaking with Nagatsuki during meetings, I felt we got on quite well together and that it'd be fun to team up and work on something. So, I brought up the idea with him and that's how we got the ball rolling. Teppei Nagatsuki would add on to this by saying, yeah, we met face to face while working on ReZero, but I first heard about Umehara through a video game I had recently played. It was a really interesting game and I thought to myself, man, that was great, who wrote the story? And listed in the credits as head writer was Umehara, so I made a point to remember his name. The very next day, we were having a meeting about scriptwriting for the second cohort of ReZero. Umehara and Nagatsuki had a very pleasant working relationship on the project. Creative differences would arise, but nothing to the point of arguing, but rather having a dialogue over how the narrative would flow. Usually, with very strong creative minds on a singular project, tensions will rise, but not with Umehara and Nagatsuki. Vivi Fluorite's Ice Song tells the story of a humanoid AI named Vivi, and an AI in the form of a teddy bear named Matsumoto requests Vivi to go on a journey to rewrite history to prevent a war between the AIs and humans in a century later. Vivi would run for one season with 13 episodes. Initially, Vivi was set to have 12 episodes, but the team decided against it. Nagatsuki touches on this and says, that was the original plan, but when we tried to organize the story into episode 1, episode 2, etc., we just couldn't manage to fit everything allotted for episode 1 into a single episode. We had already decided how the story would end, but as we were writing it, we realized that there was just no way we could cram the stuff we planned for episode 1 into a single episode. So, we begged the producer to let us add another episode. As for a continuation of Vivi, both Umehara and Nagatsuki said they felt the story was complete with the season they produced, and anything after that wouldn't personally feel right to them had they continued it. Vivi blew viewers away with its stellar animation and choreography for its fight scenes. Whether it be Vivi vs Kakutani in episode 9 or Vivi vs Elizabeth in episode 4, it was all due to the talent of Masahiro Tokumaru. Umehara would shed some light on Tokumaru's involvement with the action. The storyboards and animation were done by an animator named Masahiro Tokumaru, the same person who animated the AI battle between Vivi and Elizabeth in episode 4. Personally, I like the action at the start where Kakutani grabs Diva's hair. That was another scene that wasn't in the screenplay. It was an idea that Mr. Tokumaru added in. I was also stunned by the way he depicted that series of shifts in the center of gravity, being blasted away, rolling on the floor, but never falling all the way, and then getting right up before the knife is pulled from the arm. As I said before, Vivi Fluorite's Ice Song ran for only one season, ending on June 19, 2021. With the chapter being closed on Vivi, it was time for WIT to shift focus on another series. On October 15, 2021, we would see the anime adaptation of Ranking of Kings. Yosuke Hata would be the director for this project. His other works would include being an episode director, key animator, and storyboard artist for One Punch Man. He was also an episode director and storyboard artist for Death Parade, and worked on Boogie Pop and others as an episode director, assistant director, and storyboard artist. Ranking of Kings tells the story of Prince Boji, the heir to his family's throne, but Boji lacks the ability to speak and hear. While Boji isn't necessarily liked by his family, he ends up making a friend with a shadow named Kage. That being Boji's first actual friend, the story details their friendship and Boji's ascent to being a king. Yosuke Hata said the art style of the manga is what originally stuck out to him, and the deeper themes within the series as well. In an interview with Crunchyroll, Yosuke Hata was asked about what aspects of the story he wanted to expand on in the anime adaptation, and he responded by saying, I definitely wanted to capture the liveliness of the movements of the characters. As you know, Boji cannot speak, so we were really trying to be very expressive with the emotions through the movement and communicate that to the fans and the viewers watching the show. And so that's definitely one thing we were very careful about. Atsuko Nozaki would return to provide the character design for Ranking of Kings while also being the chief animation director, key animator, and storyboard artist as well. Arifumi Amaya was the assistant director on the project. His most famous contributions to anime would of course being a key animator on every season of Attack on Titan. Maiko Okada was the animation producer for Ranking of Kings and is currently an animation producer at Studio WIT. With that, she was also producer and production assistant on the first and second ending songs. When asked about how Okada felt personally on the production of Ranking of Kings, she responded by saying, "I think the one thing that was really memorable was the connection we built with our fans during production. We didn't really know how the show was being received by fans immediately, but around episode 3 or so we started hearing fans were really watching the show. We wanted to give back to the fans for giving us love and all these gifts and for caring about us. Some of the team members like the director and even the character designer started sending little notes back to these fans." Mayuko developed the soundtrack for Ranking of Kings. Prior to her work for Ranking of Kings, you'll primarily know her from Cells at Work, where she made the soundtrack for both of the seasons of the show. The music in Ranking of Kings is akin to music you'd hear in an RPG, and that was by design. When asked about the score of Ranking of Kings, Yosuke Hara described it as trying to go for a Middle Ages kind of image. Kind of close to music that Japanese video games are using. Maiko Okada would expound more on this. She says, "We really owe it to Mayuko, who designed all the music that you heard in this series. I heard she was continuing to record even when she was so tired that she was kind of getting wobbly, but she really put in a lot of effort and work because she loves this story." Ranking of Kings Season 1 ended on March 25th, 2022. It would have 23 episodes total. Ranking of Kings would have another season titled The Treasure Chest of Courage, but this time, it would be about short stories from the characters in the show. The Treasure Chest of Courage released on April 14, 2023, and it would end on June 16, 2023. A Ranking of Kings movie was announced in the official Twitter account as well. Further details on that will happen in the future. On July 1st, 2022, Studio WIT would announce that they're having a crowdfunding campaign to help boost global appeal for the studio outside of Japan, saying that, "Since 2012, we have produced various animations over the 10 years, but it seems not many people know about us as an animation studio. We have a strong desire to bring our contents to anime fans around the globe. Although there were opportunities to communicate with fans at physical events in Japan, we would like to celebrate our 10th anniversary by letting fans around the world know more about our works and us." WIT announced that they will have their first booth overseas at Japan Expo in France on July 14th to July 17th, 2022, and at Manga Expo in Taiwan on July 28th to August 1st, 2022. Studio WIT said the funds used in the crowdfunding campaign would be allocated to the production and construction costs, team transportation to events, streaming event production costs, any which way to help the company grow and nurture their talent. 2022 saw the release of the Netflix anime original movie called Bubble. Studio WIT would acquire a dream team for this project. Tetsuo Araki returned to the director's seat for the movie and would also work on the storyboard. Takeshi Obata was the original character designer, and for anyone who might not know who that is, Takeshi Obata is the artist for Death Note and Bakuman. The script would be written by Gen Urobuchi, the man who created Madoka Magica and wrote the light novel to Fate Zero. For the soundtrack, they would once again get help from the legendary Hiroyuki Sawano. The main song Bubble would be performed by Eve. You'd know Eve's work on things like Jujutsu Kaisen's first opening. Bubble is about a dystopian Tokyo where the gravity in Tokyo ends up broken, so this spawns groups of people partaking in parkour battles to trade supplies for survival. Hibiki, more of a wild card type of player, ends up falling into the sea, but a girl named Uda saves him. The story shows you Uda and Ibiki's time together as a romantic coming-of-age story blending in the apocalypse with parkour. This type of work would seem alien to anyone that has followed Tetsuo Araki's work in the past. Araki would be asked about this very same thing. Araki replied by saying, "It all started with conversations with our producer Genki Kawamura about telling a coming-of-age story. That was also the point where we decided to use the motif of the Little Mermaid. What I ultimately wanted to depict was this sense of meeting someone that would make you break out of your own shell and break free, but also told through action sequences, which you can see and bubble through the various parkour scenes." Araki touched on the Little Mermaid being the inspiration behind the movie down to how the film was being portrayed. He says, "The motif of the bubbles comes from the Little Mermaid. The story is about a mermaid that turns into bubbles and ultimately disappears. We wanted to reverse that and make it a story about bubbles that turn into a girl. Since the bubbles in the film have their own lore, we had to work to convey their role in the story through visuals. Since the details of the bubbles can't be explained through dialogue, it was a tough task to convey their role in the story while ensuring that the audience understands. We tried to express a sense of life in the bubbles through controlling their color gradation. The visuals were a very important aspect on Bubble. Even though this world has been devastated by tragic events, there is a serenity and almost peacefulness to the film. All of this was something Tetsuo Araki had in his mind for it. One new thing we did for this movie, because we wanted it to be a bright and colorful story, was to include someone in our staff called a color scripter. We put that person upstream of the entire production process so that we could really control and define the colors and the way we wanted to tell our story through that. That's ultimately how we have arrived at this bright, colorful movie that you see. Even though Bubble released on Netflix on April 28, 2022, it would see a theatrical release on May 13, 2022. It grossed over $509,309 at the box office. Assembling this monstrous team to make a project like this seems almost nigh impossible. Person after person with such reputable work, how did any of this even come to be? Adding to the production of Bubble, Araki had approached Kawamura and proposed the thought of the two of them making a movie together, saying that he wanted to work with someone who was well versed in being able to create content for mass appeal. Now, Kawamura having been a fan of Tetsuo Araki's directorial work on Attack on Titan, it was essentially a done deal. They'd spend half a year discussing the ideas. Gen Urobuchi helped them with the science fiction concept and would expound more on them. Araki is already familiar with Gen Urobuchi due to the two of them working together on Guilty Ground, but Urobuchi was uncredited based on the work he was doing. Kawamura was more than happy to collaborate with Urobuchi, having been a fan of Madoka Magica. Takeshi Obata originally was extremely busy at the time to consider doing the project. Having read what the story bubble was supposed to be, he had reached out to Kawamura and agreed to the project. A passion project from all these talented creators, something they all felt struck a creative chord for everyone present on the movie. Before we get into the next project WIT would work on, I have to mention that in May 2022, WIT would join in a partnership with Aniplex, Cloverworks, and Shueisha to form a brand new company called Joen, which is a company focused solely on the production of art and animation. Their company statement is, "We strive to support the animation industry and related ventures by taking a supporting role and allowing the people involved in planning, production, and distribution to take center stage. We'd like to rise to the challenge of establishing a new framework for the animation industry through cooperation with those who can help us accomplish this goal, supporting creativity, empowering creators." A company driven by making sure everyone is taken care of and valued for their time spent on creating the content we enjoy. They said, "We aspire to introduce a new structure for those involved in the creation of animation, by creating an environment that allows for the continuous production of high-quality animation while ensuring studios and creators are rewarded in line with what they produce." This is a very honorable goal to achieve for a company as hardworking as animators, creators, anyone involved in the production process, and with the backing they already have with the companies that are behind it, this was meant to be taken with absolute certainty. Seeing as one of the companies mentioned in Studio Joen was Cloverworks, this leads us into a project that both WIT and Cloverworks collaborated on to make, that show being the widely popular series known as Spy Family. Releasing on April 9, 2022, Spy Family take over the entire world. George Wada would be a part of production yet again, and Tetsuya Nakatake is one of the producers for the show. Kazuhiro Furuhashi was the director on Spy Family. His past works would include being an animation director on episodes 185 and 193 of Urusei Yatsura. He was an episode director, key animator, and worked on the storyboard for Ranma Half, and he would be the director and storyboard artist for the 90s adaptation of Hunter x Hunter. Spy Family now has 2 seasons, with a third being announced, and a movie titled Spy Family Code White. Spy Family Code White released on December 22nd, 2023 in Japan, but it would release in the US on April 19, 2024. It would also receive a limited IMAX release as well. Spy Family Code White would earn $59,625,525 at the box office, earning the top 5 spot for the opening weekend. And prior to Code White's release, Spy Family would have a crossover with Street Fighter 6, receiving a short animation trailer with Yor going up against Chun-Li. The game collaborations wouldn't stop there though. Spy Family would get their ending song Comedy, made by Gen Hoshino, actually performed in Fortnite for the Soundwave series. May 16, 2022 saw the release of the Netflix original anime called Vampire in the Garden. Ryutaro Makihara once again would be a director for this project and would be in charge of series composition. And if the character design reminds you of anything, then it should, because Tetsuya Nishio does the character design for Vampire in the Garden. Tetsuya Nishio has done the character design for Naruto. Ryutaro Makihara talked about his time working with Tetsuya Nishio, about how much he respects him from his past work and the legacies led in the industry. For the story Makihara wanted to tell, he wanted to go for less dialogue and more on the visual side of things. He felt that Tetsuya Nishio was perfect for the job, even saying that when the two of them worked on Ghost in the Shell standalone complex second gig, he was taken back by how wonderful Nishio's art was. George Wada and Makihara both extended the offer to have Nishio work on Vampire in the Garden. Makihara, in preparation for using specific locations for the anime, he and his team went to the Republic of Karelia located in Russia. Here's a clip of Makihara telling that story.
ロケハンは行きましたね。カレリア共和国っていう、ロシアにある、モスクワから北に行ったところがあるんですけど、そこら辺とか行って、そこはなんかなんだっけ、キジ島っていう島があって、そこはものすごいなんか世界遺産だと思うんですけど、すごい綺麗な木造の教会がある場所なんですけど、なんかそこに行く道中がめちゃめちゃ大変なんですよ。そこはあえて冬行って、冬でなんかすごい大きな湖があって、そこをなんかスノーモービルでずっと行くみたいな、本当に7時間8時間ずっとスノーモービルで行くみたいな、そういうロケハンをしまして、一人で7時間なんか一人でスノーモービル乗るみたいな。で天候もすごい変わりやすいので、突然吹雪になったりとか突然晴れたりとかして、本当もうずっとなんでしょうね、これは何をしてんだろうなって自問自答しながら、そのスノーモービルで湖を横切っていくっていうのは、なんか本当になんでしょうね、この世じゃない場所への旅みたいな感じがして。
Tetsuya Nishio would appreciate that attention was put on something like that. Yoshihiro Ike would provide the music for Vampire in the Garden. His past work for soundtracks would include shows like Ergo Proxy, Cobra the Animation, Dororo, and Kuroko's Basketball. Makihara explained that seeing as they wanted to have a cap on how much dialogue is said throughout the show, the music and animation all have to make up for that, and tell a story that way. With that in mind, Yoshihiro Ike knew how to go about making the soundtrack. Makihara believed the soundtrack was exactly what he was looking for and it matched the scenes he liked for the music. Vampire in the Garden only ran for 5 episodes, all releasing on the same date. On April 4, 2023, Studio WIT would collaborate with Signal MD to create Kizuna no LL, which is an anime based on the widely popular VTuber Kizuna Ai that deals with girls attending a school to train them to be the next big VTuber. Kenichiro Komaya was the director for the anime. He wouldn't be on too many products in comparison to the amount of people present in the video, but he's worked on episode 6 as an episode director for Food Wars. He's also worked on episode 10 of Haruka Receive. Hitomi Mieno returns for this project and will be behind the series composition. Go Sakabe did the score for Kizuna no LL. His prior works would be the soundtrack for Data Live, Basilisk, and the Digimon Adventures Tri-Film series. Kizuna no LL received 2 seasons with the second season ending on December 1st, 2023. With all of this said, it is the year 2024, so what is Studio WIT up to now? Well, for starters, Studio WIT would delve back into the video game sphere and would lend their talents to provide the opening animation and animation for all the 2D cutscenes in the 2024 remake of the beloved Atlas PlayStation 2 title, Persona 3, titled Persona 3 Reload, which released earlier this year on February 2nd, 2024. Studio WIT would create an anime on Netflix called The Grimm Variations, which is based on the Brothers Grimm fairy tales. This will release on April 17, 2024. Clamp will provide the character design for this work. If you don't know who they are, I have a video where I talked about it prior to this one. Worth checking out. But to get a group like this on their project was already big. George Wada would help produce the series, which ran for only 6 episodes. I also have to mention this even though it happened late last year, but Studio WIT would announce a full remake of the anime and manga juggernaut known as One Piece, titled The One Piece. This announcement came for the 25th anniversary of the One Piece anime. The One Piece is coming to Netflix. Any official dates of when it will arrive though has not been given as of yet. In possibly the most shocking news in this video, Studio WIT would collaborate with Warner Bros. Japan to create a Suicide Squad Isekai anime called Suicide Squad Isekai, a fact so bizarre that even WIT themselves acknowledged it on their website. To make matters even crazier, Teppei Nagatsuki and Eiji Umehara are back again writing the script for this work. Eri Osada is the director for Suicide Squad Isekai. She was a key animator on episode 9 of Kill la Kill, was the assistant animation director for Bayonetta Bloody Fate, and was the animation director, storyboard artist, key animator, and chief animation director on multiple episodes of Jujutsu Kaisen Season 1. The ending theme song for Suicide Squad Isekai will be performed by popular VTuber from Hololive EN, Mori Calliope. Suicide Squad Isekai is slated for the summer lineup of anime coming soon. Its first 3 episodes are slated to drop at the same time on June 27th in the US. It will release weekly and will end on August 15th, 2024. It's very important to look at Studio WIT and to remember what it is they're trying to achieve here in this space, what their vision is. WIT would state that WIT Studio is a production studio where people who love animation come together. The images we aim to create are works that will remain in people's hearts forever and be treasured. We create animations with overflowing passion and create video works that will move and amaze the viewers. We will still continue to create animation based on what we believe to be universal values without being swayed by the trends of the times. We will continue to disseminate animation from Japan to the world, believing in the potential of creators' creativity. Studio WIT was a company only made back in 2012, has been able to do things a person can only dream of, to be able to get so many talented people across the board to lend said talents in each of these projects, no matter how small or high they might seem. A company bent on showing you their love for this medium, making stories that have a personal connection to them. To Studio WIT for being able to recognize their dreams and having the drive to make them a reality. Hey, it's Leon, and this is another long one. I actually didn't anticipate it being this long, but there was so much to cover in this video, it ended up ballooning into this. I have another studio in the works that I plan on making a video for, but we'll get to that when we do. Hope you all enjoyed this video, and tell me what your favorite Studio WIT anime was. Enjoy yourselves, and I'll be seeing you all next time. To say Studio Gainax was something special would be a massive understatement. To say Gainax changed the game of the animation sphere would also be an understatement. To say Studio Gainax works were in a field all to their own would be an understatement because Gainax was all of these things and more. It was the place where legends made their debuts and where works that are still as revered as the day they came out to this current day. This was what Gainax was able to accomplish. Today we're going to delve into the studio known as Gainax, a studio ran by fans for fans of the medium that they love. A studio so out there that it genuinely has their own verbiage for a style of ending specifically under their belt. We all know the fate of what befalls this company, but we're going to start from the very beginning of where it started, ultimately to where it ended. I decided that due to the content that I would be covering that it's best for the video to be split into 2 parts, with this one going over the productions Gainax handled and their rise to fame, where the next part will chronicle where Gainax made massive errors in their tenure and other misdeeds that played a part in its unfortunate demise. And with that out of the way, I'm Leon Brando, and this is the Anime Studio Deep Dive, Studio Gainax.
ょっと見慣れないのがありまして、それをご紹介でございますよ。
Before Gainax would be branded with the name Gainax and produce all of the fantastic works they were able to produce, it all started with several influential men within the space. Those men being Hideaki Anno, Yoshiyuki Sadamoto, Hiroyuki Yamaga, Takami Akai, Toshio Okada, Yasuhiro Takada, and Shinji Higuchi. Hideaki Anno is a name widely known within anime due to the creation of Neon Genesis Evangelion, a series I'll talk about later in the video. But before Anno would see monstrous success with Evangelion, he was always a person that was a big fan of the arts. Whether it was manga, anime, or stories dealing with war, Anno was captivated by the ability to tell stories. In 1980, Anno attended the Osaka University of Arts, where he would meet Hiroyuki Yamaga and Takami Akai, two other Gainax founders. He would work with them both on school assignments. Of course, this wouldn't be the only time he's worked together with these men. In 1983, Anno worked on the production for the opening sequence of Daikon 4, which was shown off at the 22nd Japan Science Fiction Convention in Osaka. Anno was also under the wing of prolific director Hayao Miyazaki, co-founder of Studio Ghibli. Anno would serve as a key animator for the 1984 film Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, even moving himself to Tokyo to be 100% dedicated towards the job he was given. December 24th, 1984 saw the creation of Studio Gainax, which was done with the effort from Anno's friends he made during his time in Osaka. But going back to another person during the founding of Gainax, we have Yoshiyuki Sadamoto. Yoshiyuki Sadamoto was an animator, character designer, and illustrator. But before he had any of these titles, Sadamoto didn't have any interest in becoming any of these things. Initially, Sadamoto opted in favor to become an art teacher, having graduated from Tokyo Zoukei University, a private university in Hachioji, Japan. After his graduation, however, Sadamoto would join Telecom and be an apprentice at Yasuo Otsuka. Later on, he would join Hideaki Anno and be a part of Studio Gainax. Hiroyuki Yamaga's director, anime producer, and a writer. He'd work on the opening for Daikon 3 along with Takami Akai and Hideaki Anno in 1981. Yamaga would serve as the director behind Daikon 3, whereas Anno and Akai would be animation supervisors on the project. Speaking of Takami Akai, he would work on the character designs on Daikon 3 while he was attending the Osaka University of Arts, where he'd major in fine arts. In regard to another founding member of Gainax, we have Toshio Okada. Okada would be the former president of Gainax. He would be president of Gainax until his exit from the company in 1992. Next, we have Yasuhiro Takada, who's an animation producer and would become the general manager of Gainax going forward. Prior to his employment with Gainax, Takada and Okada with the group that they had made prior was called Daikon Film, and would pay undergraduates from Osaka University to help make the opening animation for Daikon 3 and 4. Daikon Film, of course, would later be turned into Studio Gainax. Lastly, we have Shinji Higuchi, who was director, a special effects director, and designer. Alongside working with the others on Daikon Film at the time, he was also a part of the creature unit for the 1984 film, The Return of Godzilla. Shinji Higuchi would work as an assistant on the film but wasn't credited. All 7 of these men were about to make a splash in the industry. In a time where anime was booming in popularity, it would be their hunger for creating and telling stories that would shape the company going forward. Like anything, it helps to be a fan of the medium you want to produce content for, and each of these 7 men were more than just fans of the product. The name Gainax came about due to it being based on the Tottori prefecture term for giant, and it has an X at the end, so the word Gaina and the letter X were combined to make Gainax. With Hideaki Anno creating General Products, the company that would become Gainax later on, they've always had a knack for producing content that felt fun for them, and this is where Gainax would leave their mark on the anime world forever. Studio Gainax, as we know, was able to forge a name for themselves for decades to come. With a wide array of projects under their belt, it was easy to see the impact they would have on the culture. On March 14, 1987, Gainax would release a film titled Royal Space Force: The Wings of Onemisu. Hiroyuki Yamaga would be the director for this project. Shinji Higuchi, alongside Takami Akai, and Shoichi Masuo were the assistant directors. Shoichi Masuo, prior to working on Royal Space Force, he would lend his talents to Leda, the Fantastic Adventure of Yohiko, where he would work on the animation for the show. He'd also work on Macross Do You Remember Love as an assistant animation director, and would work on Project Eiko, where he would serve as a key animator and worked on the storyboard for the series. Hiromasa Ogura was behind the art direction for Royal Space Force. He'd also provide the background art for Treasure Island, Lupin III, The Castle of Cagliostro, and Tomorrow's Joe. During the time of Royal Space Force's production, Hiroyuki Yamaga and Toshio Okada would take their work from Osaka to Tokyo. This move would have set them up for their first official studio where they rented the space out from a neighborhood in Shinjuku. With this being the studio's first work, it was time for them to take production more seriously. With the release of Royal Space Force, it wasn't necessarily a smash hit for the studio. It is held as a cult classic now and was critically acclaimed, but it didn't do much to really bring it to the races commercially. Of course, this wouldn't be what Gainax is known for, but more on that later. Toshio Okada, in an interview with Animerica in 1995, would touch on why he believed Royal Space Force didn't really grasp a broader audience. He'd say that, "Our goal at first was to make a very realistic film, so we couldn't have the kind of strong, dramatic construction you'd find in a Hollywood movie. Wings is an art film, and at the time, I thought that was very good, but now when I look back, I realize this was a major motion picture. Bandai spent a lot of money on it. It was our big chance. Maybe if I'd given it a little stronger structure and a little simpler story, change it a little, make it not so different, it could have met the mainstream." On October 7th, 1988, Gainax would produce the OVA Gunbuster, created by Toshio Okada and was the directorial debut of Hideaki Anno, also written by him as well, alongside Hiroyuki Yamaga and Okada. Gunbuster was important because it would be with this project where Gainax would establish the tone of how the creative process works. Gunbuster, funnily enough, would be the first anime where breast jiggling served as a part of fan service, ultimately landing the term Gainaxing whenever it was present in other animes. Works like Top Gun and Aim for the Ace were direct inspirations to the creation of Gunbuster. With Gunbuster itself and its penchant for comedy and parody, this would be a hallmark in the anime industry, especially for fans of the time and fans of today. In Japan, it was titled Aim for the Top Gunbuster, a reference to Aim for the Ace. Gunbuster would be instrumental to the next anime Anno would be behind, but we'll get to that in a sec. Gunbuster would release its last episode on July 7th, 1989, with its final episode shot fully in black and white, a stylistic choice made by Toshio Okada, stating that he wanted the episode to be black and white because old school science fiction felt more futuristic to him, lacking some of the garish colors of 1960s and 1970s sci-fi. The late 80s and early 90s were swimming with OVAs, and Gainax saw the opportunity to strike with something of their own, and with something brimming with personality, Gainax would try to carry the momentum into their other works. On April 13th, 1990, Gainax released Nadia, The Secret of Blue Water, a concept that came from the mind of none other than Hayao Miyazaki, taking inspiration from Jules Verne's works. Jules Verne being a French poet and novelist, but it would be inspired by works like Captain Nemo and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Around this time, and especially during the 70s and 80s, anime were based on a lot of Western or European literature, so to see this have the inspiration that it does is very in line for the times. Having begun development in the 70s with Miyazaki, he was tasked by Toho Company, another prominent production company, to create a television series for them. Although nothing would come of this until 1988, when Toho still retained the story rights for Nadia and would give an up-and-coming Gainax the reins behind the project. Toshio Okada would speak on the production of Nadia in the same interview with Animerica. Okada stated that Nadia was true chaos, good chaos, and bad chaos. On Nadia, Anno didn't direct the middle episodes, Shinji Higuchi did, and some episodes were directed in Korea. Why? No one knows exactly. That's real chaos, not good. What I mean to say is, controlled chaos that's good. Controlled chaos is where you've got all the staff in the same room looking at each other. But on Nadia, you had Higuchi saying, "Oh, I'll surprise Anno, hide and change the screenplay." Screenplays and storyboards got changed when people went home, and then the next morning, if no one could find the original, I authorized them to go ahead with the changes. No one can be a real director or a real scriptwriter in such a chaotic situation. On Nadia, half of our staff was Korean, living overseas. We never met them. No control. Okada's words are very important because he puts a lot of emphasis on controlled chaos. Gainax as it stood was not a company that was predicated on structure. Actually, it would be the complete opposite of that. Okada spoke more on this fact when asked what made Gainax different from other animation studios. He said, "Yeah, Gainax is not a professional film studio. Gainax is a super amateur film studio, a super otaku film studio. A Gainax animator thinks not only about motion, but about the editing, the lighting. That's very difficult, and because we do it, we are amateurs as opposed to a professional studio with a strict division of labor." Although this was the case for projects, Nadia would eventually get a feature film in 1991, but different staff would helm the project. This happened due to NHK, a Japanese broadcasting corporation, asked for this change. NHK were actually the ones that requested Nadia to have more episodes, seeing as the show was a success in Japan, so Gainax would produce 9 additional episodes after the 30 they originally planned to do were finished. Sho Aono would direct the film, this being his only project next to directing 2 episodes of Every Day is Sunday. Koichi Takada, who worked on the original series as an animation director, would also be an animation director for the movie alongside doing character design with Yoshiyuki Sadamoto. Koichi Takada's other works later on would include being a storyboard artist for Noragami, Food Wars, and The Disastrous Life of Saiki K. Unfortunately, with Nadia, Gainax would land themselves with 80 million yen in debt, which equates to $548,452 today. You'll notice a trend of Gainax landing itself in debt due to the products they undertake later on in their tenure. With Nadia, however, not only were they in debt over the anime itself, but they also didn't own the rights to the anime, so any additional money that could have been made from Nadia could not be obtained by Gainax. No merch sales, no royalties, nothing. All of this hard work but reaping none of the benefits. It was quite the blow to Gainax. Granted, Gainax was still keeping the revenue going due to their games division making enough money to keep the company alive. Also during this time in 1992, Toshio Okada would exit the company. Okada served as Gainax's president for 10 years. Okada wouldn't be the only person to exit the company during this time either. Shinji Higuchi would exit the company and would co-found Studio Gonzo along with other animators. Gainax having lost 2 founding members in the same year was massive. It seemed like the company was crumbling at the seams. Several staff exiting the company as it was, it didn't look good for Gainax's future. Attempt after attempt after attempt for the company netted them but nothing for their works. While their works would be viewed and appreciated at the time, it didn't do much for the monetary aspect of their content creation. Gainax would generally need something to pull them out of the trenches. They'd need a guardian angel. That angel being Neon Genesis Evangelion. Releasing on October 3rd, 1995, this singular piece of media has been talked about in every facet of the internet you could humanly think of. YouTube, Facebook, internet forums, anything with any social aspect attached to it, Evangelion was discussed. It's one of the highest grossing media franchises of all time. It is a hallmark of the anime industry and pop culture, even influencing films like Nope. Hope genuinely seemed lost for Gainax, and they couldn't have asked for a better pick-me-up. By 2007, the series grossed over 150 billion yen in revenue, which equates to $1,021,207,500. Kazuya Tsurumaki would be an assistant director on Evangelion. He's another valued asset of Gainax, being a long-term animator for the company. Of course, his biggest contribution to Gainax would be the creation of Fooly Cooly, but more on that a bit later. With the end of Evangelion releasing in 1997 to cap off and give a definitive ending to the series, Gainax was on top of the world with this major success. But unfortunately, the good times wouldn't always last. In 1999, then president of Gainax Takeshi Sawamura and the studio tax accountant at the time, Yoshikatsu Iwasaki, were arrested on allegations of tax fraud. This was earned during the release of Evangelion in July 1997. In 1999, they were both found guilty of concealing 1.5 billion yen in corporate earnings, thereby failing to pay 580 million yen in corporate taxes. To put this into perspective in USD, they would have been hiding $10,212,075. Mainichi Shimbun reports that Takeshi Sawamura allegedly evaded paying corporate taxes by reporting fictitious costs for company software during the years 1996 and 1997. Yasuhiro Takada would speak further on the matter in his tell-all book, The Non-Techie Memoir, Studio Gainax and the Men Who Created Evangelion. He'd state that, Sawamura understood our financial situation better than anyone, so when Evangelion took off and the money really started rolling in, he saw it as possibly our one and only opportunity to set something aside for the future. I guess he was vulnerable to temptation at that point, because no one knew how long the Evangelion goose would keep laying golden eggs. I don't think he purposely set out with the goal of evading taxes. It was more that our level of accounting knowledge wasn't up to the task of dealing with revenues on such a large scale. Gainax would continue to produce other animes like Karekano, Modern Love Silliness, and Ebichu, but in the year 2000 a new series would be formed by even hungrier talent than before, that series being Fooly Cooly. Fooly Cooly is no stranger to the channel, but this series is very in tune with the spirit of Gainax. This series is very synonymous with Gainax being a staple within the company. Kazuya Tsurumaki, the creator of Fooly Cooly, was asked questions by fans at the 2001 Otakon convention in Baltimore. He was asked if Fooly Cooly was supposed to be as bizarre as it was. Tsurumaki would respond with, "From the very start I wanted a different flavor. To achieve this I had to retrain the animators to be as stylized as I wanted it to be because I wasn't drawing it. I knew that not everyone would get it. I deliberately selected very obscure J-pop culture and anime subculture jokes and references. Because Eva was so somber, I always intended to make Fooly Cooly outrageous and wacky." He was also asked why so many of the male protagonists that Gainax creates are unhappy with no parents. Tsurumaki replied with, "Yes, the directors at Gainax are all basically weak, insecure, bitter young men. So are many anime fans. Many Japanese families, including my own, have workaholic fathers whose kids never get to see them. That may influence the shows I create." Gainax was bent on not giving you the same experience multiple times whenever something would release. It would have an imaginative flair that's akin to their studio. But Gainax always had their finger on the pulse of the culture. While Fooly Cooly wasn't nearly as successful or recognizable as Evangelion, it would be a cult classic on the Western Front. It helps that Gainax always had younger staff at the ready, always ready and willing to prove themselves. It showed that even at this time and current juncture of the company that Gainax had a never say die attitude. With the anime space at the time being extremely competitive where studios were pushing out their best work or beginning to get their footing, Gainax was in that same vein. 2000 was the dawn of a new era, and the 2000s was just that for Gainax. It was a defining era for the company especially. Already capping it off with Fooly Cooly, it was a very strong start to a decade that would make anime fans fall in love with multiple works produced by them. On August 19, 2002, a short was directed by Hideaki Anno, but who'd serve as the art director, the character designer, and scriptwriter would be none other than Hiroyuki Amaishi. Amaishi having joined Gainax in 1995, a name widely known in the anime space as well and someone I've talked about before on the channel. He'd work on a short called Anime Tensho, this being his first work where he'd be in charge of art direction. Yo Yoshinari would be a key animator on this project. Yo Yoshinari along with Hiroyuki Amaishi are important figures in anime, especially with what Amaishi would achieve later on in his career in just a bit. Gainax were always big on comedies, making sure the fans were entertained, and Magical Shopping Arcade Abenodashi was just in line to do so. Releasing on April 4, 2002, co-animating the series alongside Madhouse, Hiroyuki Yamaga would return to the directing seat for this show. This wouldn't be the only show they'd co-animate with other studios. Series like Cutie Honey, This Ugly Beautiful World, Petite Princess Yusi, and Corpse Princess, there were a ton of shows that Gainax and other companies would lend their talents to. 2006 would be an interesting year for one of the founders of Gainax. Something major was happening. In May 2006, Hideaki Anno, one of the leading founders of the company, would be forming his own company, a company named Studio Kara, and was looking for animators to bring along. Studio Kara's plan was to produce films. In 2007, the following year, Kara would release the first series of movies for Evangelion titled Evangelion 1.0 You Are Not Alone. In October 2007, Hideaki Anno would resign from Studio Gainax. Another leading member, with that member being Anno himself, was massive, but his departure wasn't a negative by any means. Anno would actually allow Gainax to retain the rights to merchandising for Evangelion, but Studio Kara would get royalties on works that Anno was involved in, like being a director or a creator of said work, a deal that felt mutually beneficial to both parties, except this would later come back to bite Anno in the future. Of course, on April 1st, 2007, Gainax would release Gurren Lagann, a series I spoke on back when I talked about Studio Trigger not too long ago, the breakout hit for Gainax and Hiroyuki Amaishi's debut series. This was, and still is, an anime staple. Gainax was essentially riding a monstrous wave at this point during the 2000s, but it wouldn't last once the 2010s came. The 2010s were a very tumultuous time for Studio Gainax. Prominent works would come out from them during this time, but it was over the course of the 2010s where the company would suffer massive blows to reputation. Lawsuit after lawsuit would plague the company, and incorrect business decisions would also play a major factor in this as well, and it was around 2012 where these poor decisions would rear its ugly head. In the prior video, I talked about Hideaki Anno leaving Gainax to form his own company, Studio Kara. Anno had made a deal with Gainax that Gainax would retain the rights to the merch sales, but Anno would get royalties on projects he was directly involved in. Anno believed this to be in both of their best interests, until it wasn't. After this deal was struck, Gainax would earn less money from the Evangelion title, but in 2012, Gainax stopped paying back Kara entirely for the money that was owed to them. The Gainax and Kara saga would obviously not end there. In 2014, Gainax begged Kara for a loan of 100 million yen, saying that if they did not receive the money in 3 days, they would go under. Because it was Anno's old friend Yasuhiro Takeda asking for the money, Anno agreed to pay up, but as a condition, Gainax would have to transfer the rights to handling the merchandise and royalties to Kara 1 year earlier than originally planned. Other than that, Anno wrote that there was no interest or other conditions on the loan. Anno was someone that had personal ties to the company. After all, he was one of the founders of it, so this next move displayed by Gainax would be a slap in the face to him on everything he stood for. Not only did Gainax not pay back the loan, they also sold the rights for Gunbuster, Diebuster, and Fooly Cooly, 3 works that Kara staff had been heavily involved in, without telling anyone at Kara. Anno wrote that he had only ever received the royalties he was due for Evangelion, and that to this day, he has not received the royalties he is owed for Gunbuster and Nadia, among other works. Now keep this in mind, as Gainax was doing this, Anno was completely out of the loop. He has no idea of what's going on at this current juncture. These are all works that he's directly tied to, and they're being sold off without his consent. Money that's supposed to be in his company's pockets are now in somewhere else, unbeknownst to anyone. Of course, Anno would eventually find out about these dealings happening. He had to retaliate. Anno would state that, "I could have shrugged off the loan that never got repaid, but we were anxious to preserve the production materials we had poured blood, sweat, and tears into." In 2016, Kara sued Gainax for 100 million yen and won the case in 2017. During the case, Gainax wouldn't appeal the case, and a formal apology was issued by Hiroyuki Yamaga. He'd apologized for everyone involved with the trial and to the companies associated with the trial. However, he did mention that Gainax would be restructuring and returning to the former glory that made Gainax into the company it was at the time. Gainax over their tenure would always incur these massive debts through one way or another. Mismanagement always seems to be a key factor here when it came down to business decisions. In a document by Gainax themselves on the details of the bankruptcy, which we will come back to soon, states that since 2012, our financial situation has worsened due to poor forecasts and restaurant management. The establishment of an unplanned CG company, large unsecured loans to individual executives, and the failure to win investment contracts, which has resulted in the management and executives privatizing the company. Due to the large amount of debt created by the executives, we fell into a difficult situation, such as being expelled from the committee for non-payment of royalties and being sued for debts. Hideaki Anno was a person who was very wary of the way Gainax was being handled prior to his exit. He'd often give his piece on how to manage certain things better, but no one would be receptive to his criticisms of the company. It wouldn't stop there either. In 2011, Hiroyuki Amaishi and Masahiko Otsuka would exit the company as well and would form Studio Trigger. Hiroyuki Amaishi and Masahiko Otsuka 1 year prior would work on Panty and Stocking, a project they both held very dear to them as they were working on it, and even after production was finished. Panty and Stocking was a home run with audiences establishing itself a niche within the Western sphere, but Gainax just held onto the project with no plans to continue it. Panty and Stocking was even confirmed to have a season 2 at the end of the season 1 credits, but it would never come to be, but we'll get to that a bit later. To dial back the clock a little bit here, we're going to go back to the production of Nadia, and there's a man I have to bring up, and his name is Hiroaki Inoue. Inoue served as a producer for Gainax and was one of the founders of the company, but he would actually have a falling out with the company as to why he would exit it soon after. Okada and Inoue weren't on the best of terms. The two were actually vying for the top spot of being leader of the company during the time, but Okada would actually give the spot to Sawamura instead, a move that caught people within the company off guard. There were talks within the company with employees thinking this was a ploy by Okada to try and hone in on the power of the company, but Yasuhiro Takada disagreed with that notion. As meetings were underway for the production of Nadia at the time, Inoue was pursuing his own projects. Yasuhiro Takada would speak on this and say, Inoue viewed this as an opportunity to strike off on his own. He decided to bypass Okada, whom he no longer considered trustworthy, and had Sadamoto and Maeda secretly work on the settings, character design, storyboards, and so forth. NHK already went through with the pitch and accepted working on Nadia, but Takada wasn't going to take this lying down. He stated that, Okada, Sawamura, and myself attended the Nadia production meeting at NHK. In no uncertain terms, we demanded that either Inoue step down from the project or Gainax would withdraw. There was a producer from Toho in attendance, and I wouldn't be surprised if he bears a grudge against us to this day. They had already filled the director's position, but he said something like, "This isn't at all what we talked about in our first meeting," and promptly dropped out of the project. Anno would later be chosen as his replacement, and the rest of the staff as well as NHK and Toho sided with Gainax rather than Inoue. In one fell swoop, Inoue had left the project and quit his position at Gainax. For as successful as Nadia would be, it would have never-ending stories of production woes as it was being developed, a power struggle on top of other animators working on the project that no one knew about, to being 80 million yen in debt after the series. This would tie into Gainax's other issues and how they would arise. Which leads me to Tomohiro Maki. Maki was the board director of Gainax in 2015, but was appointed as the representative director of Gainax in October of 2019. During the time of Maki's tenure with the company, Studio Gainax owned a condominium in Tokyo Adachi's ward, which the company called it the Production Women's Dormitory. The Production Women's Dormitory served as a place for young girls to enter the condo, and many were seen leaving it. Unfortunately, this would take an awful turn. The following topic does have to do with sexual assault, so if this topic disturbs you, I'll leave a timestamp in the video to when the discussion is over. Tomohiro Maki would also operate a production company where the purpose of it was to train young voice actors, and the teenager in this ordeal was in an exclusive contract with the company at the time. The unnamed victim said that Tomohiro Maki asked me to take dirty pictures so he could sell me as a voice actress. I didn't know how it all worked, but I was told that it was necessary for marketing, so I agreed to the filming and massage even though I didn't want to. Mainichi Shimbun reports that Maki would use the excuse such as the actress's feet were swollen and that he'd massage them as the cover-up for him to do such indecent acts. Police statements stated that Maki engaged in obscene acts with the woman on 4 separate occasions between February 6th and the 23rd, and all of these would take place in that same condominium owned by the company. The victim would then make a formal complaint with the Tokyo Metropolitan Police. The victim would have another statement saying that there were times when I refused, but there were also times when I had no choice but to accept because I was led by his words. I think his act is a terrible and despicable act that exploits people's feelings. Tomohiro Maki denied the charges and claimed during the trial that the photos were necessary for business. Maki was then found guilty and sentenced to only 2 years and 6 months in jail. After his arrest, other studios distanced themselves from Gainax. Studios such as Yonago Gainax, Gainax Kyoto, Gaina, and Studio Kara all released statements distancing themselves from Gainax or any involvement in the proceedings at the time. Hideaki Anno would speak personally on the matter, stating that, "First and foremost, we would like to express our heartfelt condolences to those affected by this incident. Furthermore, I feel extremely disappointed that Gainax, a company which I helped to found, was involved in production for a long time and even served as a director at one point, has been reported in this manner." Anno, of course, would start off the op-ed by thanking the victim for bringing such an important matter to light like this. Following this ordeal, the entire board of directors were changed on December 27, 2019. Going back to Gainax's company statement, they would state that in order to resolve the confusion caused by the scandal of the former representative director, we revamped the management team in February 2020 with the kind support of Color Inc. Gainax, fresh off the revamp, it would seem that the company would be in a much better light due to everything changing internally, but that would not be the case because they would be back in debt yet again. While working with Color Inc., Gainax also made a statement on what transpired while working with them. Gainax stated that, "We discovered facts such as large amounts of borrowing from financial institutions, defaulting on debts to various companies in the animation industry, and selling and transferring intellectual property and production materials to companies without the permission of the legitimate rights holders, and we've begun to normalize these facts." The amount of secrecy and cover-ups within the company, it was no wonder they would eventually fall under. The company already operating under their means and then not paying back companies would garner more of a negative reception business-wise with Gainax. Gainax already was distanced from other studios, but to then borrow more funds with the intention of never paying it back further cemented this company's standing with others. And of course, this would mark the beginning of the end for Gainax. Credit research firm Tokyo Shoko Research estimates Gainax owes approximately 380 million yen, which equates to $2.4 million USD, to 71 creditors. This, on top of the massive debt they got in 2012, would be too much for the company to bear going forward. There was nothing more that Gainax could realistically do in this situation, but they would speak on this as well, stating that, "With the cooperation of Kara and the directors of the new system, we have began working with the cooperating companies to confirm the rights of the works, protect the rights of the writers and creators, and properly manage and operate the intellectual property and materials that are being scattered so that the main works can be operated in the future through each production committee." However, in addition to the situation where many of the former management remain shareholders, we have not been able to resolve the large amount of debt that had been accumulated under the previous system. And to pivot to this current year in May, Gainax was then sued by a debt collection company, and with everything that has happened thus far, they deemed it impossible to continue their business as it stood and filed for bankruptcy. Studio Kara would then be in charge of Gainax's trademark and the IP rights from the company and the full owners of the Evangelion IP. Shows like Panty and Stocking and Gurren Lagann, 2 series that were essentially held hostage by the company, is now fully owned by Studio Trigger. A fight that Hiroyuki Amaishi and the entirety of Trigger was over the moon to win so the series can have a future. Production IG owns the rights to Fooly Cooly. Seeing as they were the ones producing the anime after Gainax, this decision would be the best decision they would make going forward. Even though Gainax went out the way that it did, we can't forget what the company was able to accomplish. A company comprised of anime fans and lovers of the medium getting the opportunity to make that very same content that they enjoy. A team of dreamers, a team that never took the conventional way out, a team that decided not to chase trends and to be able to produce what made themselves happy. Look at what was able to branch off from Gainax: Studio Gonzo, Studio Kara, and Studio Trigger, 3 prominent animation studios with great works attached to them, all stemmed from people that used to work at Gainax. Even though Gainax had all of these issues internally, the heart of what it stood for is being carried by Studio Trigger. Trigger is the studio that will be able to carry Gainax's legacy while forging a new one for themselves. Trigger is able to take what worked from Gainax and build upon it with the same business philosophy it once had. Studio Kara, with rights to Evangelion, which is now a billion-dollar IP, are able to maximize in this series with no strings attached and within the home of the original creator. Gainax was able to make so many different shows with dedicated fan bases. Fooly Cooly, Panty and Stocking, Nadia, Gunbuster, Madaka Box, the list goes on. So while it suffered the fate that it did, it would be well to remember their impact on the culture, to always be different, to always challenge what is normal, to be creative, to say this isn't conventional and that's okay. This is what Gainax was, the legacy that Gainax was able to leave behind. but what are the founders of Gainax doing now? Hideaki Anno, which we know as the founder of Studio Kara, he was able to make his final Evangelion film, which grossed over $92,246,218 at the box office worldwide, and put it in the number 34 spot of highest grossing Japanese movies of all time. Hideaki Anno was also able to write and direct Shin Kamen Rider, which came out last year, which grossed over $16 million worldwide, making it the most commercially successful Kamen Rider movie. Toshio Okada runs a successful YouTube channel with over 1 million subscribers where he goes over everything anime and otaku culture as a whole. Yoshiyuki Sadamino has worked on shows like Great Pretender, co-created the Dot Hack franchise, and has worked on the future Fooly Cooly series as a character designer. Hiroyuki Yamaga is still working on Uru and Blue, which was supposed to have come out a couple years ago, but no word on a current release date has been made. This was a project he tried to get made back in Gainax, but nothing came of it. Shinji Higuchi would direct Shin Ultraman, which released in 2022. He was nominated at the 46th Japan Academy Film Prize for Director of the Year for that movie in 2023. He would act in the 2024 film Brush of the God, and he is set to direct the remake of the 1975 film The Bullet Train, which is supposed to release on Netflix, but no date has been mentioned as of yet. Takami Akai would create Yonago Gainax in 2014, and a game he worked on called Princess Maker 2 would be re-released in 2024 titled Princess Maker 2 Regeneration. His company is operational to this day. As for Yasuhiro Takara, there's no word on what he's currently doing. All of the founders are still successful and are in different parts of their careers, and they've essentially left the groundwork for others to be inspired by them and to pick up the mantle. I mentioned Trigger, and they're paving the way forward with that. Studio Trigger has made the widely successful Cyberpunk Edgerunners, which won the Anime of the Year awards at the Crunchyroll Anime Awards. They made a special PV for the 40th anniversary of Transformers and are working on season 2 of Panty and Stocking. As much as Gainax has had a tumultuous time in the industry and there were a lot of not great moments within it, we can't forget what they have done to shape anime and the culture forever. There's a lot of positives that were birthed from Gainax, and it shows that no matter what, a silver lining can be had as long as you're willing to reach for it. Studio Bones has been a studio synonymous with very impactful works within the 2000s. Celebrating its 25th anniversary, Studio Bones has been a powerhouse in the anime scene with very beloved shows under their belt and having feats of stellar animation within their shows. Bones is a fan favorite among many anime studios, and today we'll delve into the legacy of what Bones has to offer. So with the intros out of the way, here is the Anime Studio Deep Dive, Studio Bones. Before Bones had a grip on the masses of anime fans, it all began with 3 men, those men being Masahiko Minami, Toshihiro Kawamoto, and Hiroshi Osaka. Masahiko Minami is the representative director of Studio Bones, but before he became a founder, he would attend the Osaka University of the Arts where he graduated. He would attend school with the other legends in the industry such as Hideaki Anno and Hiroyuki Yamaga, other people I've mentioned in the channel previously. Minami would join Studio Sunrise in 1984. He'd do desk work and he'd work on shows like City Hunter where he's a production assistant, and on Cowboy Bebop and the movie for Bebop as a producer. In an interview with Full Frontal Moe, Minami was asked where the name for Bones even came from. He'd state that, well, there's a sort of let's all be friends and make anime together feeling to this, which relates to that song from the Showa period called Love Me to the Bone. Also, we were a small team of 8 people, kind of bare bones so to speak, and after that, we'd have to try our best to make the meat to cover them. As for Toshihiro Kawamoto, he talked on his reasoning for how he became an artist. The biggest reason I entered the creative industry is that when I was young, I would draw some sketches, then other people would compliment my work and it would get to my head. I sort of developed a little bit of an ego at the time. That's probably one of the biggest reasons why I continued on with art. Originally, I worked as a salaryman or an office worker. I never thought I would get into the animation industry, but after receiving all kinds of influences around me, I ended up going into animation. Toshihiro Kawamoto took an interest in becoming an animator after seeing the series Macross. Kawamoto would make his debut in the 1986 film Orion, where he worked as an in-between animator for the film. After completing various projects, he'd work at Sunrise, where he was a character designer on Gundam Stardust Memory and the 8th MS team, and would also provide work on Cowboy Bebop as well. Hiroshi Osaka got his start working at Anime R, which is an animation studio run by Moriyasu Taniguchi, who has been in the animation industry for well over 60 years. Osaka would also work on several projects at Sunrise and establish a name for himself as a proficient animator. In 1991, Osaka would leave Anime R but would work on Sunrise projects as a freelancer. In October 1998, Toshihiro Kawamoto, Hiroshi Osaka, and Masahiko Minami would come together to form Studio Bones. Masahiko would detail one of the reasons why the group would form Studio Bones. He stated that it's not the only reason, but mainly because a bunch of us, Hiroshi Osaka, Toshihiro Kawamoto, Kazuki Akane, and Shinichiro Watanabe, wanted to make anime together as a team, and Sunrise was too big a structure for this. Above us were the directors, and above them, the sponsors. We wanted a place to make the kind of anime such a system would never allow. When we did the test screening of the very first episode of Cowboy Bebop at Sunrise, everyone went nuts. I got a lot of, what the hell are you making here? And if you're gonna make something like that, might as well make others. Well, I took that chance. On June 24th, 2000, Studio Bones would release an anime original movie titled Escaflowne, which is a theatrical retelling of the anime series that came prior called The Vision of Escaflowne. Toshihiro Kawamoto would serve as one of 7 animation directors on the project. Kazuki Akane was the director for Escaflowne and wrote the script for the movie. He's also a prominent storyboard artist, having worked on renowned works prior to Escaflowne. Escaflowne, having released in 5 theaters, grossed $94,000. Other works would include an anime by the name of Clockwork Fighters Heroes War. This series ran for 1 season from October 24, 2000 to May 1, 2001. Hiroshi Osaka was a character designer on Clockwork Fighters, and Tetsuro Amino was a director on the series. Tetsuro Amino's name would be attached to other noteworthy projects as well. This mecha anime took place during 19th century Japan, where advancements were being made during the time. With the conflict between Hyu and the Wind Gang, a group of people bent on trying to forcefully usher in a new age, and the conflict has been had between both factions. This is one of Studio Bones' lesser known works, but they soon latched onto bigger projects soon after. Other projects included Battle Doll Angelic Layer and Cowboy Bebop Knocking on Heaven's Door. Both of these dropping in 2001, but the bigger product was them working on Cowboy Bebop. This was a joint effort collaborating with Studio Sunrise. Hiroshi Osaka was an assistant animation director on the film. Other talented people that would be on this project would be Yutaka Nakamura, someone who will pop up again later on in the video. Yutaka Nakamura served as the action animation director. So whenever you saw how fluid the fight scenes were in this movie, primarily between Spike and Vincent, this was due to his choreography. Everything in the movie moving with seamless effort was down to the animation directors and assistant animation directors. Knockin' on Heaven's Door was released on September 1st, 2001 and was re-released in theaters in January 2024 for Anime Expo Cinema Nights. But onto the other products that Bones handled. That would be Angelic Layer, which is an adaptation of the manga made by the iconic manga group known as Clamp. Clamp being no strangers to the channel as well. Angelic Layer ran for 26 episodes from April 1st, 2001 to September 23rd, 2001. This series would actually coincide with another one of Clamp's works called Chobits, being in the same universe as the series. It would go on to win the Animation Kobe Award for TV Feature in 2001. 2002, Studio Bones only released one anime during this time, and that would be Razaphone, releasing on January 21st, 2002. This series would also have more added to it, like a movie adaptation of the anime titled Razaphone Purelitas Consentio, Razaphone Interlude, which is an OVA that was bundled with the Razaphone Special Edition game for PS2, and Razaphone Specials, which were specials for the DVD release of the show. Razaphone was another mecha anime under Bones' belt, with Masahiko Minami producing it. Yutaka Nakamura would also be attached to this project, serving as a key animator on the opening and several of the episodes. 2003 would also be an interesting time and more of a shift for Bones in terms of popularity. The anime original Wolf's Rain debuted on January 7, 2003, created by the late Keiko Nobumoto. Nobumoto was a notable figure in the animation sphere, having her name attached to very prestigious projects over the years as a scriptwriter. Yutaka Nakamura appearing once again as a key animator on this anime. Toshihiro Kawamoto would do the key animation for the opening and ending of the show. Yoko Kanno provided the score to the show as well. Yoko Kanno you remember from numerous other works, but primarily from Cowboy Bebop. This action-adventure fantasy anime ran for 6 months, ending on July 29, 2003. It would have 4 OVAs to the series as well. Yutaka Okamura, now known as Tensai Okamura, is the director for the anime. He'd mainly serve as a storyboard artist for several animes alongside being a director. But what would also premiere in the year 2003 would be the first adaptation of the manga from Hiromu Arakawa, Full Metal Alchemist. Here is where Bones would start to build up that notoriety it would receive from anime fans. Staff at Studio Bones caught wind of the manga and told Masahiko Minami about this up-and-coming manga, and Minami decided he would animate it. Studio Bones would get in contact with Hiromu Arakawa and the publisher that FMA was running in, Square Enix Magazine Monthly Shonen, to get a deal together for the adaptation. Manichi Broadcasting System, MBS for short, was a Japanese TV channel in Osaka in the Kansai region. They had given Bones 51 episodes to animate the project. Of course, everyone knows at this time that FMA's manga did not have enough material for this to be filled out for 51 episodes, and with Studio Bones not wanting to go for the filler route, which was something very prominent in animes at the time, they opted for telling an original story with an original ending. FMA from this time would receive movies from the original adaptation, and then on April 5th, 2009, we would see the debut of Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. This serving as more of a manga-accurate adaptation and is held as one of the greatest animes ever made. FMA Brotherhood was a part of a lengthy lineup of Bones' standout works. Yasuhiro Iri, having worked on the original FMA as an animation director and an episode director, he'd serve as the director for Brotherhood, as well as being a key animator, storyboard artist, and episode director. Kazushige Kanehira was in charge of the art design on the show. He'd worked on several animes, serving as an art designer on those as well. Yoshimichi Kamado, who had already worked on anime prior to his work on Brotherhood, would skyrocket his name into a top animator within the industry and from fans alike, commonly known as his work on episode 19 of the anime Where Lust Dies. Here you see in extreme detail how she's being incinerated, a sequence where you feel the intensity of the flames on her skin, no wasted motion on how it draws you into how the scene will eventually conclude. Kamado's name will be brought up again because his talents will be on full display on other shows that will be covered. Masahiko Minami was one of 6 men that were in charge of planning for the series. FMA Brotherhood would be a monstrous success for Studio Bones. A team of immensely talented animators and upstarts getting to showcase their skills in a large product like this was definitely a step in the right direction for the studio. Bones would provide more services for video game works with Mars Daybreak. Created by Sony Interactive Entertainment, licensed by Bandai, and released on the PS2, this is another mecha anime that Bones would produce in 2004. It ran from April 1st, 2004 to September 23rd, 2004 with 26 episodes. Hiroshi Osaka would once again be behind the character design along with being a chief animation director. On April 17, 2005, Studio Bones would release Eureka 7. By now you've noticed a trend of mecha anime being a genre heavily showcased from Studio Bones, but this would have a spin to it. Tomoki Kyoda, an assistant director for Studio Bones, was the director for Eureka 7, and he's an avid fan of electronic music. References to the genre would be littered all throughout the show. For example, the mecha in Eureka 7 are named the LFO. In the series they're referred to as the Light Finding Operation, but on the electronic music side it stands for Low Frequency Oscillators. Those are used to create certain effects that you mainly hear in electronic music. Eureka 7 was a popular show for Bones, especially garnering a large following from airing on Adult Swim's Toonami block on April 16, 2006 to April 29, 2007. It would even return to the Toonami block in 2012, which is the year Toonami would make its return to cable television. Kazutaka Miyatake served as the concept designer on the project. He's mainly known for being a mechanical designer on several anime you're familiar with. Eureka 7 would also receive several continuations in movies, 3 original net animations, 1 OVA, and 4 movies with one of them being animated by Studio Kinema Citrus. On April 5, 2006, Bones would release Ouran High School Host Club. Takuya Igarashi would be the director for the anime. One of Igarashi's first works would be on the Sailor Moon series. After all, he was a part of Toei Animation at the time. He would be attached to another important Bones anime, but more on that later. He's currently freelance but still pops up on Bones projects. Toshihiro Kawamoto was a key animator on the show, and Masahiko Manami would help produce it. Komiko Takahashi was a character designer, chief animation director, and animation director for Ouran High School Host Club. She was a former employee at Madhouse where she would do character designs on shows like Tokyo Babylon and Cardcaptor Sakura. Takahashi now exclusively works with Studio Sunrise or Bones on anime projects. Norifumi Nakamura was an art director on the project. Usually he's put in charge of background art, but for this and Fullmetal Alchemist he'd be an art director. And of course he'd also provide background art for several episodes of the show. Ouran High School Host Club would end on September 26, 2006, a series that still remains popular to this very day in the shogun manga space, both anime and manga. To pivot away from anime for a second, we do need to touch on Hiroshi Osaka for a moment. In spring of 2007, Osaka's health deteriorated and he'd spend his time in his hometown in Neyagawa, which is in the Osaka prefecture where he'd reside in his family's household. Osaka stayed in a hospital to nurse his health, but unfortunately, he would pass away from cancer on September 24, 2007. He was only 44 years old. Hiroshi Osaka was a legend and a pioneer within the industry. To have co-created a company that's seen nothing but success for the 25 years it's been around has been awe-inspiring. To have taken on the amount of products it has and had given the level of animation with the several talented animators and staff within Bones or who worked at Bones would establish the legacy the company has built. Koichi Horikawa, an animator that has stuck with Bones since its inception, had some words to say on Osaka's passing. He'd say, "It was a big shock when Osaka died. Before he co-founded Bones, we were drinking buddies, and I thought we'd always go on being that way, but then he suddenly left us." Staff at Bones spoke very highly of Osaka, claiming that he was like a mentor to them. An inspiration to many and will be remembered greatly. As devastating as Hiroshi Osaka's passing was, Studio Bones would release more shows in that year. Shows like Skullman, Sword of the Stranger, and Darker Than Black would all be showcased during that time. Darker Than Black being the standout from that year. Releasing on April 6, 2007 and ending on September 28, 2007, Darker Than Black aired with 25 episodes. Tensai Okamura was the original creator of the series and also the director for Darker Than Black. When asked on how the series came to be, he replied and said, "I kind of wanted to do a story with modern Tokyo as the setting at least once, and I also thought about doing something with spies in it, so this story got created." Darker Than Black would have 2 seasons and a special 4-episode series that takes place during the first and second seasons. Once again to the director's seat for Soul Eater, and Yutaka Nakamura would also be attached to the project as a key animator for numerous episodes, and he would also be a key animator for the second opening as well. Akatsuki Yamatoya was in charge of series composition for the show. Yamatoya having been a scriptwriter on works well before Soul Eater. Make you see that you're not going to get this particular animation elsewhere because it's something that's unique to Studio Bones. That was a core factor in Bones' central philosophy. And what other show to add to this than Space Dandy? Releasing on January 4, 2014, Space Dandy was an anime original spearheaded by Shinichiro Watanabe of Cowboy Bebop fame, where he served as the chief director for the show alongside Shingo Natsume, who was the director for the show. Shingo Natsume had built up his catalog coming into Space Dandy, and he would be one of many people who would send his anime into the stratosphere. Space Dandy was a unique case, seeing as it would actually premiere on the Toonami block hours before it would appear for the Japanese audience, because at the time it was projected to get a ratings boost, and boost it did. Space Dandy is very fondly remembered within the anime scene because of its zaniness and creativity of how it got across its story to the viewer. Kensuke Ushio would also provide the music for Space Dandy, and this is especially telling because this would be Ushio's debut work on making a soundtrack, and his catalog from 2014 to 2024 is nothing short of magnificent. And Yutaka Nakamura would once again appear on another product as a key animator on both seasons, and with how insane the visuals got on the show was thanks to his talents yet again. And it can't go without saying that the late great Yu Kono also led her talents towards Space Dandy as an art director. She was mainly a background artist on multiple acclaimed works and would occasionally be an art director as well. She was associated on other Bones products, but more on that in a bit. Masahiko Minami was a part of the planning team and helped produce the show. Around this time in 2014, Bones had become many a favorite for anime fans. They were checking a lot of boxes they themselves set out, and the same could be said for audiences, with shows like Noragami also coming out in the same year. Noragami ran for 2 seasons with 2 OVAs. Kotaro Tamura would direct Noragami. Tamura was a storyboard artist among many other titles and had his name on other noteworthy projects during his tenure, and Hitomi Mieno would provide the series composition. Hitomi Mieno I've mentioned before on the channel in a previous video, but she's also a singer-songwriter along with writing scripts for several shows. Toshihiro Kawamoto would provide the character designs of Noragami. Noragami had a pretty sizable following after its 2nd season would conclude, but other shows under Bones' production would reach bigger audiences. No mention has been made of a 3rd season as of yet though. Following in the shonen footsteps, we have Blood Blockade Battlefront based on the manga written by Yasuhiro Naito, the creator of Trigun. Rie Matsumoto was the director for the anime while also being the sound director as well. Blood Blockade Battlefront would be the 12th project in her career. Her past works would include several seasons of Precure among other anime that she would be a director on those shows. Her work on Blood Blockade Battlefront would earn her some recognition. This was another anime where Toshihiro Kawamoto would be behind the character designs as well. Blood Blockade Battlefront would have 2 seasons, and again serving as a very important factor in the show was Yutaka Nakamura, displaying how fantastic he is at his craft with this show as a key animator. Bones has a ton of momentum and it's carrying them well into the next year, and 2016 would be monumental for the company. Bones released other animes during 2016, but there were 3 standouts from this year alone, and all 3 of these are brand new shows at the time. Bungo Stray Dogs, Mob Psycho 100, and My Hero Academia. To say Bones was on top of the world at this point would be a massive understatement. Bungo Stray Dogs ran for 5 seasons and had a movie on March 3rd, 2018 titled Bungo Stray Dogs Dead Apple. Takuya Igarashi would be the director for all 5 seasons of Bungo Stray Dogs, including the movie. Bungo Stray Dogs is fairly popular and would have a dedicated following to it. Tako Iwasaki provided the score for the show, and he was behind many other animes where he would lend his talents for their soundtracks. Yoji Enokido wrote the script and did the series composition for every season and movie for Bungo Stray Dogs. A good amount of the staff has remained the same on the production of this show throughout the years. As for the other shows, Mob Psycho 100, which is the adaptation of the webcomic by One, was met with universal adoration with this adaptation. Capturing One's art style while also making it a visual spectacle was in tune with what Bones loves to do with putting their personal spin on things. And of course, behind some of the biggest moments of Mob would be Yutaka Nakamura. He was a key animator for seasons 1 and 3. Yoshimichi Kamado was a character designer, key animator, and animation director for all 3 seasons of Mob. Hiroshi Seko, being a screenwriter, worked on the series composition for Mob Psycho 100 Reigen and for seasons 2 and 3 of the show as well. Hiroshi Seko recently and in the past has been a scriptwriter for some monstrous works in his time, and Mob Psycho was another project added to that list. Masahiko Minami would produce seasons 2 and 3 of Mob Psycho and worked as a planner for season 1. Yuzuru Tachikawa served as the director for Mob Psycho seasons 1 and 2 and the chief director for season 3. Masahiko Minami would talk more about Tachikawa's talents in the making of Mob Psycho. He'd state that, because the original source material is a manga by One, the manga itself is very pure, very simple. The art doesn't have very many lines, so the expressions are really hard for us to be able to take on in animation, but the animators do a great job of being able to express those emotions, even with the manga being that way, and it's really thanks to Tachikawa's direction. Minami was very meticulous with how he wanted Mob to come out. He said that he wanted Mob to be animated with a sense of luxury when he spoke to Yoshimichi Kamada and Yuzuru Tachikawa. He would always make sure to speak with directors extensively on projects. And with all of these projects being animated, Bones is a process in which this is done. Studio Bones is a total of 5 studios. These studios would all be in charge of different titles. Each studio would work on different products annually and the staff would change as well. Minami would speak more on the inner workings of the studios. There are differences in the animation that the producers and directors aim for. D Studio, currently headed by Mari Suzuki, a female producer, and they're working on Bungo Stray Dogs. It's an anime that definitely has some femininity to it. For example, if Bungo Stray Dogs were to be created by A Studio, it would probably be a different anime. With this occurring, Minami stated that the staff at Bones get higher salaries on top of the production of the budget going up alongside it. Minami speaks on how animation is generally handled in Japan. One of the demerits of Japanese animation is that it's done on 3s. There's an industrial history of not wanting to spend money on the full 24 frames per second that Disney always did, so they would reduce the number of frames and freely use various methods like pulling the cell or background image away while filming or using panning by keeping the camera in place and moving the image. An important part of the entire statement is Minami refers to how the animes come about, with it not necessarily being a budgetary issue rather than it's a lack of human resources that don't finish according to schedule. There's a common misconception in the anime sphere that when the animation isn't up to a certain standard, that is because said studio didn't have enough money, when more times than not, it's because it came down to time constraints and not having enough people to helm the project. Of course, there are exceptions to this, but more than likely, this is the unfortunate thing that befalls studios. Bones' strategy to avoid such issues is to lower the amount of titles they actively take on. With Mob Psycho 100 seeing the success that it did with 3 full seasons that have adapted all of one's manga, it would be one of Studio Bones' staple anime series. Which leads us to My Hero Academia. Based on the manga of the same name from Kohei Horikoshi, this is yet another success story from Studio Bones, spawning 7 seasons with a final 8th season coming in 2025, and 4 movies, grossing $129,612,207 cumulative. Kenji Nagasaki is the director for My Hero and has been for every season even to its last in all 4 movies. Most notably, Kenji Nagasaki used to be a storyboard artist and episode director for Monster. Yoshihiko Yumakoshi is a well-known character designer and key animator for anime and has stuck with My Hero from the first season to its last as well, handling not only character design but key animation and being an animation director. The universally praised soundtrack for My Hero is done by Yuki Hayashi, where he's also done the soundtrack for every season and movie and will return for the final season. Toshihiro Kawamoto will serve as an animation director as well as an assistant animation director on episode 12 of the first season. Kawamoto lent his talents to the first season of My Hero, the 3rd season, the first movie, and the 7th season. And without further ado, Yutaka Nakamura would also serve as a key animator and storyboard artist on everything concerning My Hero Academia. On October 3rd, 2019, Bones will release the Netflix anime original titled Carol and Tuesday, created by Shinichiro Watanabe, and he'd serve as the chief director behind the product with Motonobu Hori. Motonobu Hori has worked on the likes of Metropolis, Spirited Away, and Paranoia Agent, among many others. Shinichiro Watanabe was asked why he decided to make the main characters 2 young girls. He would explain that this isn't a story about some lonely genius artist, it's about 2 people who can't create their ideal music but separately are capable of making something amazing together. Basically, I wanted to depict this collaborative effort. Anime is also a collaborative effort. Just like our work, I wanted to show those moments where 1 + 1 equals more than just 2. Carol and Tuesday would also be the first work where he had to deal with 2 female protagonists, to which he would speak further on it, saying that, sure, this is my first attempt at female protagonists, so it's a challenge, but that's exactly why I want to do it. If I'm just repeating the same stories over and over, then I can't stay motivated. Making 2 girls the protagonists is my way of slowly but surely trying new things. The background music for Carol and Tuesday would be provided by Maki, real name Dominic Solol. Maki is a Canadian musician known for composing, producing, rapping, the list goes on. He was approached with an offer to work on Carol and Tuesday by Shinichiro Watanabe. Watanabe said that, I've always liked Maki's music and listened to it a lot, but I think the reason I offered him this job was because I saw his concert in Japan. When he came to Japan last time, I felt like I could see images in every song, and I thought it was music that would be perfect for a soundtrack. These artists would also provide music for the soundtrack for Carol and Tuesday. Carol and Tuesday ran for 2 seasons, and this would be another product that Keiko Nobumoto would work on as she wrote the script for episode 15 of the show. Hitomi Mieno would also return as a scriptwriter for the anime. 2020 saw the release of the animated adaptation of Josei the Tiger and the Fish, releasing on Christmas of 2020, based on the Japanese short story written by late author Seiko Tanabe, released on March 27, 1985. Kotaro Tamuro directed this film, and Yuji Kaneko served as the art director for the film. Masahiko Minami was asked on an interview with QApp about what drew Studio Bones in to make the movie, and he responded with, so you know, with Josei, it's originally a book made by Tanabe, but there are no missiles, no explosions, no robots, no fights. So this is very out of the ordinary if you look at the kind of products we work on in Studio Bones. So director Tamura, who also worked on Noragami, really insisted that he wanted to try out something new and try working on a film. So we tried to line it up for him and Tamura, and we really wanted to challenge ourselves and also challenge Bones to take on this new type of work. The mark of any great studio is to be able to do things like this, to be able to try new things regardless of how the end result will be, and Bones felt very confident in their ability to be able to bring this adaptation to life. Josei the Tiger and the Fish would gross $384,212 worldwide. Kotaro Tamura was asked about why they made the film accessible to children, and Tamura said it wasn't the intention, that it just sort of happened to come out that way. He would state that, the original story does include depictions of sexuality to show the culmination of their relationship, but it doesn't really add to the drama at all, so I left it out of the film. In animation today, there still aren't many stories that deal seriously with people in wheelchairs. There aren't many that deal with sexual motifs either. I thought the movie might appear too unorthodox if I tried to combine both of those things. Representation can only take the next step forward once the genre has matured. I hope we start to see more stories dealing with wheelchairs in the future, and I intended Josei to build a foundation for that to happen. And speaking of shows not usually in Bones' wheelhouse, we have the anime original Skate the Infinity. Masahiko Minami brought up that this is another product that was entirely different than what they're used to. Hiroko Utsumi would be the creator behind Skate the Infinity, and he asked Utsumi what exactly the product would entail, and Utsumi would respond with skateboarding. Manami would say it might be kind of interesting to do a sports anime, but we really haven't found much of an opportunity until Utsumi came to me and said, oh, I really want to try the skateboarding anime. Since Utsumi really insisted, I thought, okay, this might be fun. Manami was pleased with the rapid popularity Skate the Infinity got, especially internationally, and they figured that Bones would have another hit. Skate the Infinity's success would actually land itself another season, with the release date of that still unknown to this day. For a venture that was uncertain for Bones at the time, this was another risk that paid off for the company. Also in 2021, and more of a return to form for Studio Bones, on November 25th, 2021, the anime adaptation of Super Crooks would debut, based on the 2012 comic of the same name written by legendary comic book writer Mark Millar. Releasing on Netflix, Super Crooks' return to the action-based content that Bones is popular for. With Netflix during that time, and especially now having an increased interest in anime, and with Super Crooks being a story based on superheroes, it was the perfect story to latch onto. Mark Millar stated that Netflix pounced on the idea for Super Crooks to be adapted as far back as 2017. Super Crooks played to a lot of Bones' strengths as a studio, and Motonobu Hori once again would be the director for this work. Motonobu Hori even stated that with the material it would still be difficult for him to portray. I have always loved Mark's work, and when Mark gave me the plot, I thought, oh, this is going to be a really big challenge, but when it comes to Japanese anime, I feel very good at action, and also expressing the inner emotional landscapes as well. I wanted the show to feel like a restaurant buffet of both. Mark Millar initially opted for Super Crooks to be a low-budget live-action movie. He'd even be in talks with a producer and a director to make a rough draft of the script, but nothing came of it. But Bones was able to turn Super Crooks into something more than even he would have dreamed of. Toa Tei did the soundtrack for Super Crooks. This would be his debut series making music. He also did the theme song composition and wrote the lyrics for it. Super Crooks wouldn't be the only anime produced by Bones for Netflix. Bones would also produce Godzilla Singular Point, which is the 13th episode ONA, which ran from March 25, 2021 to June 17, 2021. The year is now 2024, and what is Studio Bones up to now? Well, Studio Bones split off from its production division under a different subsidiary known as Bones Films. The CEO of Bones Films made a statement on it on their company website, saying that Bones' philosophy is to have a high degree of independence and freedom in animation production. Bones Films is dedicated to carrying on the efforts that Bones has made over the past 25 years, and for all the people involved in all the works we create here, we promise that this new company will be a wonderful place where they can demonstrate their creativity and grow. Studio Bones is working on the final season of My Hero Academia, which will come out sometime in 2025. The anime will be 9 years old by the time it concludes. Bones also produced the anime original series Metallic Rouge, which can be viewed on Crunchyroll. Studio Bones also made the announcement that it would be animating the highly anticipated Gachi Akata with Hiroshi Seko doing the series composition. What makes Bones special is the fact that it was comprised of so many talented people that were able to create names for themselves on the platform they were able to see so many uses of expression and the company able to do what they personally want to do, to make a name for themselves in the genres that they've chosen and to excel in that at the best of their abilities. Bones is as old as a lot of the fans are of the company, so for people to grow up with the studio and see how their growth came along inspired other artists to do the same. Bones was able to etch their names among a legendary status that no one could take away from them. Studio Bones is something special, and in their 25th anniversary, they're aiming ever higher in their pursuit to keep creating content that we all love, and that's exactly the way they want it to be.